Welcome in, friend. Hey, SkepTalk on Monday nights, June 8th. Glad to see you, and I'm glad to be joined with Aaron tonight. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing all right here. I hope you're doing well.
I'm doing well. I see you're representing tonight with the OSU.
Yes, the OSU.
There's only one. There can only be one.
It's the official name. It is literally the Ohio State University. It is, when it comes to universities, it is the definite article.
It is. For those who don't know, there actually is another Ohio University, and they may or may not have a squibble over the name at some point. But you were at OSU for, was it your PhD or your master's?
Well, I did both there, but I mean, it's all part of the same program.
Okay.
Technically, the way things worked is I had to do some extra paperwork to get my master's degree, and I did that just in case my PhD went up in flames. So it's like, well, I can at least leave with this other piece of paper.
Right. That's fantastic. Well, I think we already have one caller in the queue, so we're starting out hot tonight, and it's a theist, a believer. So that's pretty exciting. If well, the caller can. If you want to call in, though, the number is 720-619-2288, and we've got lots of time in the show. I'll make the same announcement I make often, which is if you wait later in the show to get called in, we might not be able to get to you. So we're just encouraging everyone, if you want to talk, the beginning of the show is the best time to call in, and we always try, when we have people in the queue, we try to get to everybody that we can. We don't want to leave people hanging. So we'd love to talk to you about whatever God concept you want to talk about, and it looks like our first caller wants to present an argument for the existence of God and the true prophecies of the Christian Old Testament. So it should be interesting. Name is Yitz. Welcome in, Yitz, to SkepTalk. You're on with Justin and Aaron. How you doing?
Yes, hello. Thank you for lending me the microphone. Sure. And the title of the video is that Tanakh, the Bible, is full of junk. But I respectfully disagree. There's a lot of beautiful poetry, and there's some philosophy, for example, and Kohelet, I know the Hebrew better than the English.
It is a wonderful book. I agree. Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
And then of course a lot of archaeological data has been proven by it as well, and not everything, but most likely King David, for example, there's no reason to suspect that he didn't exist and had some kind of monarchy to one extent or another, or like even Abraham. It's possible he was just a mythical character. There's no like writings or anything about his life. But on the other hand, he could have easily existed. He's just one person, and he made his way from Mesopotamia to the Levant, and there's no reason, to.
Well, let me ask you a question, Yitz. Your call-in says that you had an argument for the existence of God, and it says prophecies of the Christian Old Testament. Are you a Christian, or do you just believe in the Hebrew Bible?
Oh no, I'm Jewish. I'm not Christian, but I said Tanakh. But with all respect to the guy on the other line, he didn't know what I was saying, so I said just put Christian Old Testament. That everyone will understand the point. But those interesting prophecies. Actually, I believe DZ, if I got your initials correct, DZ. I think I called in the past, and we actually discussed some of those prophecies, which are,
I recognize your name, yeah.
Which are very interesting, and of course not all of them have come true, but some of them you could say, that it's interesting. Like we returned to the land began to bloom again. They said it would be desolate for 2,000 years while we were majority in exile, and that seemed to be the case. It says that the Dead Sea would become fresh, and to some extent, there are pockets of fresh water that pop up around the Dead Sea, and it's just very interesting. And I mean, with all due respect, I understand that God can't maybe be proven objectively because maybe God lies outside science, but why not have some hope and have some traditions? Traditions can be beautiful, and organized religion can be wonderful. We have all kinds of holidays, like Pesach, for example, which reminds us of the value of freedom over slavery. Isn't that a beautiful tradition that would be wonderful if we could continue passing it on?
I think it is. It's a beautiful message. The idea that you can be delivered from bondage, but I want to make sure I'm understanding your argument correctly. Are you suggesting that the evidence or the argument for God, your specific God, lies in maybe the veracity of the Hebrew Bible? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I would believe so. I would hope so.
Okay. Well, let me ask you a question, because this would be a little bit different than talking to a Christian. Christians have a little bit different conception. But what do we do? And I think you and I talked about this last time. What are we supposed to do with the prophecies that didn't come true?
Yes, it's possible that you're correct, that they simply did not come true. In fact, Ezekiel, who mentioned the kingdom of Tyre falling, for their many wickedness, they ended up not falling in his lifetime. And he even admitted it later on and said the prophecy might have changed, or maybe he just thought it up.
He says
I have no issue.
He'll get his payment from Egypt, he said.
And he didn't get that either.
Yes.
It could be incorrect. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
My tradition, we're not like Christians, where we just have blind faith. Judaism is more about action and what you do in this world and how you try to make this world a better place than when you were brought into it. And it's about keeping the commandments, the ethical commandments, for example, and it's more about action rather than belief.
Well, let me ask you a couple questions, because we kind of have a
I'm even comfortable with God's existence.
We kind of have a special situation tonight because Aaron's on with us, and I think it would be a great opportunity to kind of talk about how God fits into the worldview. So, for example, in my worldview, I don't think there's a need for a prime mover. I don't think there's like a first moment. I don't know how God explains anything in our universe, in physics or anything. I think we kind of have an explanation for all those things. So I personally don't understand why we would add God into the equation when we kind of have an explanation for it. And Aaron, I don't know your entire your particular cosmological model that you adhere to, but I'm curious to find out if you're like a cyclical universe or eternal inflation, or what do you typically go to?
So I first have to say, what came before the hot state of the universe 13-ish billion years ago, I have to say I don't know. I lean towards the model right now that was proposed about 20 years ago by Sean Carroll and his grad student Chen, so the Chen-Carroll model, which basically has time going in both directions from the Big Bang. So there is a before our universe, but with time going the opposite direction, and the arrow of time is created from the increased entropy going in those two different directions. It has some interesting ontology to it, but it's far, far, far from proven. And I have to say, might be true, but 95% chance or something else, because what's the chances that a couple people 20 years ago figured out the whole universe? Until we get the evidence for that, I have to be pretty agnostic on all things. For all we know, and I've looked at the physics more recently about this, you can start from a timeless state and then time to emerge out of it. That was one of Hawking's early models back in the 80s. So it's like, hey, we can just have time come out of timelessness. It's weird, it's amazing, it's awesome, and I don't know if it's true or not. So I have to put up giant question marks around that. I would say probably not cyclical in like the universe grows and then shrinks again, because I don't think the evidence indicates that. Dark energy is going to have to be way weirder than we can justify. So that's the only thing I would say is probably not going to be the case. But universe has confused me plenty of times. It's got plenty more time to keep confusing me.
Oh yes.
I agree.
Oh,
Justin, you're muted.
Alan.
Sorry, I apologize. I was I was muted. I think the question that I have for you, Yitz, is what is God doing for the worldview when we take into account the world the way we have it and how we think it got to this position? What's the good, like, scientific or philosophical reason why we would want to plug or need to plug a God into something? Is there something that we can't account for?
Yes, I would make the case that for one thing, Hashem, God is love, and it makes us more comfortable to believe that we can connect a power of a higher source. I would also argue that there are still many things about the universe that we don't know, and maybe we will someday, and maybe the God of the Gaps argument is ultimately fallacious. But there are plenty of things we don't know.
It is fallacious. It is literally fallacious.
It is, but I'm actually letting you do it right now. That's why I asked you. Is I'm actually asking you, is there a gap? Because it might be that we can actually fill the gap with the right question and answer.
Yes, we might. I tend to look at it as like you take a sheet of paper and you put a dot on the paper, and that the dot represents all that we know right now, and the rest of the paper might be all that we may never know. So we may never find out, like, for example, just what is dark matter, for example. Why is there superimposition with the quantum level? And some of these questions we may never know. We don't even know everything about the deepest psychology of the human mind. So I think that the creation, in many respects, is very beautiful. It's very inspiring. And I see, I think I made this point with you, Justin, last time, that it might have a lot to do with personality. If you're a cup half empty or a cup half full, if you're a cup half full, then you might see a lot of love in nature. And if you're a cup half empty, you might take more of a respectfully a cynical view, where all of the creatures in the globe are fighting for their own survival. But it probably depends on how you look at the world around you. And, there was
do you believe in evolution?
Rabbi. Yes, I believe in evolution.
So let me ask you a question about evolution. So this is something that to me has been quite curious. So I think, and even in the Hebrew Bible, like in Micah chapter 4, Isaiah chapter 11, we get this idea that God's ultimate desire is not for animals to prey on each other. Do we agree on that?
Yes, that's with Olam Haba, when it's the perfect state of perfection. But there's different interpretations. The Rambam famously wrote that the world will continue to go as it's going now. It's just that nations will not fight amongst each other.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, I'm familiar with Rambam. There's quite a few interpretations, but my point is kind of like this. You and I both believe in evolution, and I don't have a theistic evolution, but you have a theistic evolution. I think the question that I have is, it seems to me that creating evolution so that all of the animals prey on each other rather than, I don't know, say living in peace, like the wolf and the lamb, it says in Isaiah. I don't see why like a good, loving God, the one you're describing, would create a system that requires carnage and bloodshed and endless suffering. That seems really incompatible with the idea of a loving God.
That is true. That's a great argument against God, the divine hiddenness, and why would He allow suffering? My personal take is that maybe it's more poetic, and maybe this is no excuse for what God did, but maybe suffering teaches something in us, maybe to care for those who are downtrodden, and to help them. And maybe that's kind of the point, is that we learn from others' suffering, and we realize our humanity, and we try to help them. Maybe that's the reason why.
If you don't mind, I'd like to reframe it. So I'm actually not talking about human suffering. I think that's a typical argument. We hear that a lot.
Yeah. Animal suffering to be included in it.
Right, well, that's what I'm trying to figure out is what is to be learned or gained, by a baby giraffe getting torn apart by lions. What's the benefit for the animals?
Yes, this is a very hard question. It's basically going back to, I believe, Voltaire, who famously said, "Why didn't God make the best of all possible worlds? Why is the world broken? Why is it the way it is?" definitely from the lion's perspective, it's feeding its own cubs and it's finding its own survival, evolution. But from the baby giraffe perspective, you're right. It is a terrible death, and I have no explanation for it. Excuse me. Why did God allow? I'm sorry. Why did God allow the Holocaust, for example? This is a great question of morality that we wrestle with. That we're always trying to find the answer to that. Why did He make the world a place of suffering? I don't have an answer to that.
And that's an honest take that you don't have an answer. But I think the thing that Aaron, I would implore with you is when you have these areas where there's difficult questions and there's just no answer. To me, that seems like the worldview doesn't provide an adequate explanation for things. Whereas, like under our worldview, evolution is basically expected. We expect for the biological creatures to prey on each other. You know what I mean? So if we're just saying, hey, what's expected under this worldview and what's expected under this worldview, right? I'm looking at the God worldview and I'm saying it doesn't make sense. I'm trying to figure out, it looks like to you it doesn't even make sense in some cases. Why are we holding on to it?
I suppose another way of looking at it, I could propose the argument that in the Kabbalistic texts, everything was created like a vacuum, and everything was damaged. And our job is to try to perfect the world. So maybe that's the mission, to bring perfection, the best that we can, each and every individual, whatever we can offer. And I would also implore that if there is another realm that exists beyond this life, and I hope there is, it's a wonderful, comforting feeling to have. I would hate to lose it. But if there is something beyond, maybe this lifetime in some ways and might be insignificant, because how long does a person live? 70, 80 years or so, and then they're gone, unless they reincarnate, which many are surprised to learn that we do have a belief in that.
Well,
especially
the
Orthodox.
Let me ask you a couple questions. I want to make sure I fully understand your exact position, because there's not every person who is in Judaism are identical. Do you believe in the Kabbalistic texts?
Somewhat. I'm not a Kabbalist at all. I'm actually Reform, not Orthodox. But I find some of the mysticism to be enlightening and insightful, and I enjoy reading about it.
Do you take the Hebrew Bible to be true, or just true in the theological message?
Both. It depends what narrative we are discussing. Like, for example, the creation account or the global flood, I don't believe in literally.
So I think the question I would ask is, like, when it talks about the laws of Moses being handed down on Mount Sinai, do you think that actually happened?
Well, my belief is that something happened. I don't know. I wasn't there. I would hope that some of it came from God. That's just what we believe.
Mm-hmm. So what are we supposed to make? Like, if we believe any of these laws were handed down by God, what are we supposed to do with the laws that are barbaric? And I'm not. You're familiar with them. I'm sure you are. Deuteronomy 22, Deuteronomy 21. Numbers 31. There's a litany. You've heard us go through them. You watched the show. What are we supposed to do with these texts in light of this idea that you have a God that's all loving, but also He does cut pregnant women open and smash babies' heads on stones? To me, those are entirely incompatible.
Yes, those mitzvot, those commandments, those laws are just simply done away with. What many people are unaware of is that the Torah was meant to be updated. It was never meant to be static. That only came later, after the dissolution of the Sanhedrin, for example, and after the destruction of the temple. But prior to that, just like the Code of Hammurabi, it was meant to change from generation to generation. So, I mean, you could make the argument: why did God give harsh laws to the people of that time? Maybe because He was working with what He had, and we could come back and counter that and say, well, why did He not just make them a superior intellect to where He could give more ethical laws to what we have today? And again, I don't really have
So you answered one other question that I didn't ask yet, which is whether or not you believe in the oral tradition, and obviously you do. But what are we supposed to do with like Deuteronomy 4:1 and 2, where God says to observe all of these laws so that you can live in the land, and he says forever. Right? He doesn't say that I want you to practice these for temporary. He says you must neither add anything to what I command or take anything away from it. So what that means, what I'm taking away from this, and even it's repeated in Deuteronomy 30, verse 6 through 9 as well. He talks about the end when he's going to circumcise the hearts of all his people. And he says they're going to follow this law, right? So I don't see a path forward to say that this law is temporary, because he says that you're going to follow it.
Yes, that commandment deals more specifically with do not make new laws in God's name as if he specifically commanded it. Like, don't add a Yom Tov to Shabbat, for example, having 2 days of Shabbat and say that it's in God's name. We clearly have multiple examples where laws do change. It's the famous story of Ruth. That when she marries Boaz, she has to redeem the land. But in the original Torah, it doesn't discuss that in Levirate marriage. So clearly it was reapplied and reinterpreted to be practiced differently by that time, by that generation.
So, I mean, my question, I think, if I'm trying to be a little more pointed here, is the law as it was given, right, was supposed to be followed. So in Deuteronomy 30...
It was meant to be inspiration. It was meant to be something that you would look to, like the Code of Hammurabi. I mean, there are elements of the Code of Hammurabi where you could almost say the Torah plagiarized. They're so similar. It's the exact same law. And I don't have an example off the top of my head. I'd have to look into it again. But I believe that all of the evidence points that it was meant to be fluid, and it could change at any moment. And
I don't see why it would be fluid, because God says in Psalm 9 and 19, and I'm sure you're familiar, it's a popular one. He says that the law of the Lord is perfect, right? It revives the soul. What need is there to change and modify and get rid of a perfect law code, especially when he says, by doing this, Deuteronomy 12:28, you'll be doing what is good and right in the sight of the Lord your God?
Yes, well, I would just respectfully push back, like the slavery, the indentured servitude that used to be in the Torah, and that's no longer practiced. I don't know any Orthodox Jews, down the road, for example, who have slaves. I mean, clearly these laws were meant to be updated based on our moral sensibilities, and as we matured, the law matured, per se. And this is my...
let me ask you a question. Can you find me a passage in the Hebrew Bible where God intimates that this law is temporary? Because dozens and dozens of passages say the opposite of it.
Yes, well, like the Hebrew word olam, for example, and many say that it means something that's eternally binding, but that's not exactly correct. It can be meant to be open-ended, because sometimes things have to change. Like for example, when the Israelites came out of Egypt, we can just take it as a story for now. We don't have to say it actually happened. In the story, when they came out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt, they were they never owned any land. They never had a government. They were just enslaved, and they had to create almost a new reality for themselves. So we can see based on that example that in every generation, the law can change, and we've now reached the point. This would never happen,
my friend. Yes.
Yes.
That's not my argument. I didn't make an argument of the word olam. I understand that a lot of atheists are going to, if they've studied any Hebrew, might make an argument on the word olam. I'm not actually doing that. In the Hebrew Bible, there's lots of mentions about how long to practice this, even without the word olam, right? So we've, like, one of the primary examples, like Deuteronomy 12:1, right? It says, these are the statutes and ordinances that you must diligently observe in the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has given you to occupy all the days that you live on the earth. That the word olam doesn't appear in there. So I'm reading this book and I'm saying, this is a God who wants you to follow every one of these laws. And even if they are temporary, these laws are horrific. I don't think you can call God loving, even if he gives you a horrific law code for a temporary time period.
Yes, that's a fair argument to make. I agree with that. killing off the Canaanites. I believe most of that was in regards to fortresses as opposed to actual villages and cities for people. But it still is it's something that is repugnant to the modern 21st century person. So I would agree.
But
with
was
you
it
there.
repugnant to God?
I don't know if I was God, I'd be able to tell you. I mean, I don't know. It's possible that those specific they might have been fabricated.
Because
Maybe by
God
Moshe,
seems
maybe
to
by somebody else.
God seems to enjoy the carnage, though. You're familiar with Isaiah 9, right?
Yes.
It talks about how the blood the blood that they're wading in from war is basically coming up to their cloaks. He describes these grand victorious scenes that are the most horrific scenes you've ever heard of. He talks about his own people. It says that in Deuteronomy 28:63 that just as the Lord takes delight in making you prosperous and numerous, so the Lord will take delight in bringing you to destruction and ruin and picking you off the land. This is a God that is sadistic and enjoys watching you get torn to pieces if you don't follow every single command to a T.
Yes, we also see that clarity in 1 Samuel 15, where Saul comes back with just like, hey, I brought you some animals and one hostage, the king, I forget the king of the Amalekites. And God was like, no, I said everything. That's still living. You're no longer king. Goodbye. You failed. Good day, sir. I'm putting a few words in God's mouth, but that's the tone
that's the
that
British
we get
edition
from the Almighty. I was actually going the Willy Wonka version. You lose. Good day, sir.
Very good.
The Olam Gobstopper is what had to be returned.
It's possible that the text was exaggerating when it says kill everything. There are many texts from the ancient Near East which exaggerate.
This isn't an exaggeration of how many were killed. This is God's coming in, or at least through the prophet Samuel, saying, you did not kill enough. Therefore, you lose.
Right.
Yes, there are many cryptic passages in Tanakh that we probably don't fully understand today. That may be one of them. If you take the Tanakh and put it within the framework of the ancient Near East, where all kinds of kings would exaggerate and say, "I want to kill every man, woman, and child," or that I did.
This isn't about a king exaggerating. This is God through his prophet saying, "You insufficiently killed. You did not kill enough." Not that the killing was exaggerated, but it was insufficient. And Saul is punished for not being vicious enough.
Yes, I never will claim that the text is entirely perfect, and that's why nothing like that. I mean, we can consider if you believe in the prophecies to some extent, and that we are now back in the land, even if we don't deserve it, we're not keeping all of the mitzvot exactly as prescribed in the Torah, and yet apparently it is pleasing to God, and that's why there's a modern state that is very successful economically. I'd rather not get political and discuss the conflicts or anything, but it's a successful democracy with for equality for all minorities and etc. So I would imagine that God is happy with how the states, how to its people are running and keeping the commandments today. But in terms of the past, I wasn't there. It is yes, it does sound vicious to the modern reader. To the people back then, it was probably acceptable. I would not consider it acceptable today. We are in agreement.
But the problem that we have is the God of this book didn't say that, right? So what I'm seeing is you're looking at these laws and you're saying, listen, these laws don't sound good. We need to find a way to mitigate these things by somehow saying they're temporary. But everything in the book just says that they're not. And God explicitly says the opposite. So I'm trying to figure out why, like, if God's laws are good and perfect, and He says to do them forever, why are we trying to shift and say, actually, they weren't so bad? He's trying to bring them progressively out of something. But if He was trying to bring them progressively out of it, He would have given them new commands eventually. He never did.
Yeah. So I would ask you, you know what the name, what Israel means, right?
Yep,
what
content with God.
Yes, to wrestle. So exactly that. We're wrestling with God, for better or worse. I do have to go, unfortunately. Thank you for taking my call, but something came up. But thank you for taking my call. We had a good conversation.
Yes, thanks for calling in, friend. Be good.
Yep.
I think I've talked to Yitz at least once before, and he's a likable fellow, but it's interesting to me, like and you're really familiar with the Hebrew Bible, Aaron, when you first came upon some of these texts where God is just savaging people, I mean, how did that strike you as a reader of the text? And I'm curious, like, how it doesn't concern someone like Yitz.
Of course, I came from a originally Christian upbringing because I grew up Catholic, and having these statements of God is loving, God is love, and then you see this God sent the angel of death and killed all firstborns of Egypt. And I look at that and just like, no, there's no reconciliation between these two, and I had no interest in trying to reconcile them. Honestly, I had to learn what the Bible said after leaving religion, because when I tried reading the Bible on my own as a believer, I got to the begats, could not keep my eyes open. And that is probably the greatest protection the Bible had for me, by just being sufficiently arcane in its writing style and boring, especially when my copy was King James version, so it was extra incomprehensible.
Right.
And I just remember it's like, and then this person begat this person, and yeah, I think I didn't get past Genesis 5, other than maybe occasionally jumping to something else. But it's like, yeah, this isn't possible for me to keep going through. I had to become an atheist and then discover from people like Bart Ehrman, hey, there's a more or less scientific way to start approaching this text. And it's like, oh, now it becomes a puzzle piece set to put together rather than stuff I have to memorize before I have my test in front of St. Peter.
Yeah. If you had made it to Ezekiel in the King James, you would have at least come upon the armpit pillows. Those are a special translation, but that's neither here nor there. I had one question. First of all, friends, we'd love to have you call in. The number is 720-619-2288, and it doesn't matter what your take is on our prompt. If you're upset about it, if you perhaps think we're just wrong and you want to give us an argument, heck, we take a logical syllogism. We would take a scientific argument for God, a deductive argument. Just about anything you got would be interesting. We'd be interested to entertain such a thing. But I've got a question for you, Aaron. I'm having to learn, let's say, some of the science that you probably learned in like high school as an adult now. And I'm trying to get my like hands around like relativity and like the speed limit of causation and these types of things. And there's a little tidbit that popped up, and every time I hear it, I'm like, ow, I don't understand. Someone said that because electrons travel almost the speed of a photon, right? Not obviously as fast, but they're really fast, right?
It depends. Strangely enough, the average, if you work out like what's the speed of electrons moving through a copper wire,
well,
like
that's
the average
different because they just bump through. Yeah,
right. And
I mean,
they
in
travel
space,
like millimeters. Right. Yeah. Again, it ultimately depends on how much energy they've been given. But if you're talking about like they've been, some atom has been ionized, the electrons fly off. Yeah, it's probably going a significant fraction the speed of light because they're so tiny mass.
Right.
It only takes them a little to go off at warp speed almost.
Which leads me to the question, right? So if you've got a electron and a photon, let's say the electron is moving through space in a vacuum, and it's going 90% the speed of light, right? The photon moving at the speed of light, from the perspective of the electron, it would still be passing the electron relative to the electron standing still. So the electron would see this thing passing it by the speed of light relative to how fast the electron is going, even though the electron is already moving 90% the speed of light. I don't understand it.
Yes. So this is the most important facet of special relativity. All observers in all inertial reference frames will measure the speed of light in vacuum to be the same, no matter how those reference frames are moving relative to each other. And the consequence that this gives you is, we now no longer, between reference frames, can easily agree on duration and length. That this is where time dilation and length contraction pop out just from two postulates in special relativity. All physics is the same in different reference frames, and all observers in different reference frames will measure the speed of light to be the same in vacuum. From just that, and literal Pythagorean theorem mathematics and algebra, boom, time dilation pops out.
Man, so I've got to sink my teeth into some of this. I feel like maybe I missed out because I took like maybe one physics course in college, and the rest of it was like physics for electrical engineers. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I didn't get to learn a lot of the really, really fun stuff.
Oh yeah, there's lots of fun, and I guess it depends on how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go. Because like a lot of the physics that you can do in special relativity, you can do with algebra, basic geometry, maybe occasionally calculus will come into play. But if you want to say, oh, understand solutions to Einstein's field equations in general relativity, you need a book like this.
That is a hossy fella.
Yeah, and this is a book that says, "Welcome to grad school, prepare to die."
Oh no.
I exaggerate only a little bit in that while this book definitely looks imposing, I had way more difficulty when I took electromagnetism. My general relativity course I actually did okay in. It was electromagnetism that just kept slapping me up the side of the face every time.
It's a while. For normal people, things like fields and particles can be very daunting, and I get it. It's a really weird phenomenon, and like even explaining how electricity works to somebody without drawing a picture can be really difficult, because we, like a human being in like the Western world, we almost picture an electron like a collection like water flowing through a tube, but it's not that easy, unfortunately. But nevertheless. Yeah. Now, so you read through some of the Bible. I'm curious, did you get to go into the New Testament, or did you read some of the Old Testament and be like, yeah, I think we're done here. We're not going to need this.
I have done most of my focus on the New Testament, but I have now decided to like go back, and I've been learning Hebrew, ancient and modern, and I have a book coming out this year, hopefully, on the Exodus tradition. Well, you're not going to believe it, but I don't think it actually happened.
Oh no, who could have guessed?
Oh no. Yeah. Oh no, I agree with 90% of archaeologists in the field. Who would have expected this outcome? Some of the positions I'm taking are more extreme than I first expected, but nonetheless, there's a whole lot of expertise that I've been able to sink my teeth into and find a lot of useful and interesting discoveries along the way. And one of the fun things is trying to actually watch the development of the Exodus tradition through the prophetic literature. And I focus there because those ones I can at least partially better date. Like most likely Hosea and Amos are 8th century, which means, so what they say is probably from that time period. Who knows when any part of the Tanakh was written? So just by following that, and I can say, hey, I can see trend lines here, and this is much more fascinating than hoping that we can date. First off, is there a separate e-source, and when does that date? That's been at least contentious.
Well, I think modern scholars, and sorry, we're probably going to bore some people. We're about to touch the documentary hypothesis, but before we do that, friends, we're just doing some chit chat while we're waiting for lines to load. We'll make the same announcement that we made before. If you wait too late into the show to call in, we might not be able to grab you. Typically, nobody wants to be the first caller. We get that. And then once we get a caller, the lines start to fill up, and then unfortunately we don't always get to everybody. So jump in line. We do talk to agnostics and atheists if you have questions. We just happen to prioritize theists because primarily that's where the interest is in these shows. People want to see a good, robust dialogue and maybe learn some new information. So the number is 720-619-2288. And is there a web link? I think there is a web link as well.
Yeah, I think so. It's probably in the description if you're watching this on YouTube.
That's what I thought. So,
Only if you're outside
right.
the US. Don't click it if you're inside the US, or I'll come get you. Also,
Ah,
everybody should hit the like button. That would be
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah,
Yes.
true. In order to pump up the stream, friends, hype the stream, hit the like button, do all the things, share it with your friends. They'll show it on the more people's main pages. You'll see guests pop in and want to call in and cuss us out, and it'll be a good time. It'd be a real barn burner when we get these get this thing shared out. But so I mean, you're correct. So like Amos, Hosea, these are some of the earliest texts, and that leads to what do we do with these e-texts? Now, I'm curious your position. I kind of agree with Jacob Wright and some other newer scholars in that maybe the fragmentary hypothesis is a good explanation for some of the e-sources being truly archaic, even before the Judean sources. But it was Judeans who wrapped these up into a bow and put the Judean, lipstick on the pig to make them look better. What's your view?
Yeah, I definitely say with that when it comes to the material that's considered JE or just simply not P, and this is just the language for the different sources. So just so everyone is following along, why are we just saying random letters of the alphabet? A, B, C, D? No. The original traditional form of the documentary hypothesis from Julius Wellhausen in the late 19th century is that there's these four major sources, and because he's in German, the letters are corresponding to words in German. So you have the J source relating to Jehovah, but with a J, and you need to know that J didn't exist back then if you're going to be in an Indiana Jones movie.
Well, he was German, so it was pronounced like a Y. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it was the correct pronunciation for that, and also the development of J has its own history, but that's all beside the point. So there's J for for Yahweh or Jehovah, E for Elohim, and saying, hey, these sources seem to be using different names for God. This was one of the inspirations for this. Then you had stuff that looked like it was really associated with somebody who really cares about what the priests are doing, and so this becomes the priestly source. And then the entire book of Deuteronomy, and that's just then got called D. That's the traditional things. More recently, scholars are less sure if there's actually a distinction between J and E as separate sources. Lots of questions were these ever actually separate sources that were then brought together? How independent are these various sources in the first place? I've been seeing some evidence that D might be earlier and JEP are familiar with and reacting to D material, but it's extremely messy. Yeah.
It is messy.
It's definitely complicated. Yeah.
I think my typical order of succession that I tend to go with is parts of E, and then a lot of J, and then a little bit of D and a little bit of P, and then post exile. I think it's a lot of D, like a ton of D in the beginning of like loading up the exile, during the exile, and then a pinch more after. But I'm actually looking at some of this priestly stuff, not all of it. The Exodus covenant code is obviously early, right? But I'm looking at some of these other law codes, and I'm thinking these make a lot of sense in what we see in like Second Temple Israel. But it's hard to know like how long were they adding to the tradition, because part of it could have been early, and then they continued to add to it just like a modern law code, but they give it the mouth of God so that it has force, so that people are like, oh well, this is from God, we have to follow it.
Yeah. And of course, there's always the question of, even if things look old, to what extent are they trying to archaicize? In the same way, if I start adding these and thous to my speech to sound old-timey fancy, one of the things I was just coming across the other day was the order of words in most, I shouldn't say most, but in many modern languages is subject, verb, object. So in English, I eat chicken. Subject is I, verb is eat, chicken is the object, the thing that's being acted upon. In biblical Hebrew times, the word order tended to be verb, subject, object. But when people are talking, it seems to go back to subject, verb, object, SVO.
It can, yeah.
So it's like, oh, is it the case that when they're trying to write in prose and they're not doing direct speech, that's when they try to the pinky out doing their writing? But then when they actually have people talking in reality, it's like, well, we got to have people talk how they actually talk outside. So it is curious to what extent, how different is the scribal writing versus actual Hebrew, and our library of Hebrew of this time is unfortunately the Hebrew Bible and almost nothing else. It's kind of aggravating how little resources we have compared to like Aramaic.
Right. So, I mean, I had a theory about that, by the way, because I think a lot of people notice this trend. And my theory is this: you see, first-person pronouns like ani and anoki, the more archaic version, and you see this a lot because I think when people speak, a lot of times they start first person, right? And when you start talking in the first person, a lot of times you start with I did this. You're thinking of me. This is what I did. And so you can start, rather than just using a verb conjugated in the first person, you start with I, because that's how it starts. And then it catches on. You go, well, now you're talking in the first person, but now we're talking about Bob over here. Well, we could do the same thing. We could use the word who, which means he, in Hebrew, the same way I would say ani in Hebrew. So I think it happened just because the human nature wants to, when you're talking about yourself, wants to start with whatever you were doing to express what you were doing. I could be wrong, though.
Mm. Well, I just know some languages are like much more rigid on this. So like Japanese goes subject, object, verb, and that's pretty much all sentences. So it sounds a little bit weird when I say I chicken eat, but that is Japanese word order.
Sure.
And I'd have to look to see if there are any modern languages that do go verb, subject, object, or something else. I'm pretty sure they exist, but I don't know enough linguistics to say.
Yeah, it varies too. And the problem with the Hebrew Bible is that it was being written over a long period of time, so sometimes the grammar rules aren't the same.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. I'll be doing a show here in the near future with Dr. Kip. We're going to be going over some of the dating methods linguistically and grammatically, so we can say, like, when you're looking at a text, here's, based on the grammar, here's kind of where we would expect on a timeline for this to show up, even though it's like a soft art. Like, you can never pinpoint exactly, but you can try to dial it in. Or you can look at like events mentioned, like in Amos, we've got like a natural disaster type landmark. Those are a little bit helpful.
Yeah, and funny enough, since you mentioned Kip, last year at SBL, I actually gave a presentation on trying to use computer-based methods to date the development of Hebrew, and Kip was in the audience for that. I forced him to listen to my talk. And I said, hey, here's this technique that like Google developed for some of their earlier but really successful large language models, something called Word2Vec. And I was like, hey, let me see if I can apply the same algorithm to the Hebrew Bible. Problem is, when Google did this with English back in 2012, they had billions of words, and there's not even 1 million words in the Hebrew Bible. So my algorithm, basically, every time I restarted it to run it, and it would always give like different random results, and I realized, oh, this is just a noise generator. I'm getting nowhere fast. That was my ultimate presentation.
Yeah. My understanding is that the Hebrew Bible has roughly 6,000 distinct words, but I call shenanigans on that. A lot of those words start with the same root word, like just the same shorish, and then it gets modified to mean something, like they concretize it or something, right? So like I never did an official count, but I think you can read most of the Hebrew Bible with like knowing the first 1,000 words. It's a really compact language. I think the grammar is where it gets a little bit difficult. And Greek is just nonsense. I kicked my ass when I was in school.
Oh yeah, when I took Greek in college, and I was lucky to do this because I did this when I was still at Michigan State, and literally like after I graduated, you had like the big 2008 financial crisis, and then to cut funds, cut costs, I should say, they closed down the classics department. So literally the school of the Spartans was no longer officially teaching the language of the Spartans, which was a bit disastrous. But in that short time, I was able to take Greek, and my professor pointed out, like every day I have to rewrite out the conjugation tables. And he realizes there's probably some 8-year-old in Athens, thousands of years ago, who could just be running circles around him in terms of grammar, where he's just like trying to brute memorize these things. But for kids, it's literally their daily life, and it's no big deal.
Yeah, that's the case. In fact, I had a theology professor. She was awesome, Dr. Joanne, but she was the first woman that went to seminary at her seminary because they wouldn't let women in, and they didn't like having her there. And she says the teacher that gave her the most trouble was her Greek professor, and I'll never forget her quip, because she was smarter than he was, obviously. And he walked up to her at the beginning of the first class of the first semester of her, first year of seminary, and looked at her and said, "Women don't learn Greek." And she goes, "Well, how did they talk it? How did they speak it?" Cooked, absolutely cooked, burnt. Send them out back. That was pretty good.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure her Greek is better than mine. I'll just give one anecdote of some of the struggles I've had when I learned Greek in one of my tests or quizzes. I can't remember if it was a quiz or a test, but professor gives us, passages that we're supposed to translate. I'm going through one word at a time, desperately trying to figure out what the hell is being said. And I get to this word, and I look at it and it's like, so I see there's phil, I see ippos. Okay, so phil, that's short for philo, probably for love, and then ippos. Oh, maybe that's with a h, so maybe it's hippos. Then it's like, oh, lover of horses. Then I stop myself. It's the name fucking Philip. Why did I not just stop and move on? And I just spent like 10 minutes translating a name instead of getting this damn test done. So that's struggles I remember.
That's really demoralizing. There is a reader's Greek Hebrew version of the Bible that you can get, where what they did, I forget who published it. I got it floating around somewhere. All the names, or like the geographical names of places or the names of people, they put the text in gray rather than black, so hey, this is a name dummy. Make sure you're reading this correctly. It's like, oh, thank you.
Well, to be fair, the test did actually signal to me because it did have with a capital phi, so it should have already signaled, hey, proper noun, stop right there. Just sound it out. It's literally my dad's name.
So when it comes to as much as I enjoy language, I don't know if our audience is going to be able to follow along, and it's going to get boring real quick. But we do have lots of time left in the show for those who want to call in. I know we just got this stream. We actually killed some time already. Have we been live for almost an hour? We just chit-chatted.
We started a little late, so about 50-ish minutes.
Very good. So we got 2 hours left in the show, friends. The number is 720-619-2288. And you've got two hosts here that are actually pretty familiar with history and the Bible. And Aaron is obviously a Kung Fu grandmaster on physics. By the way, what was your dissertation on?
So my dissertation work focused in education research. So go through, learn all the physics, and then realize, hey, the students we teach this stuff to, they're struggling with some of the basics. Like even after they leave the classroom, they come out with their intuitions intact, which are actually contrary to Newtonian physics. So the most basic example is this. If you take a baseball and you throw it while it's flying through the air, what forces are acting on the baseball? And the students will say, well, there's probably some air resistance. The air is blowing on it. Fine, yes. Well, there's got to be gravity. I mean, it's obviously heavy, so there's something pulling it down. Yes. And then they'll often say, and there's also a force acting on it, pushing the ball forward, which is why it keeps going forward. And that's in complete contradiction to Newtonian physics, that an object in motion doesn't require a force to keep moving. It stays in motion until acted on by an outside force. That's what I thought. Yeah. But this is the intuition that you actually can find in Aristotle. You can find it in medieval philosophers. You can even find it in the early writings of Galileo. This is like the normal intuition that humans have. And so I joined the research group at Ohio State that was focusing on this. And because I had studied Greek and Latin, I could also go back to the ancient sources to also use this as additional test data. Because I did examine modern students and get data from them, but it's like, hey, I also have these ancient students, and I can also go back and check their wording more exactly, because I at least know enough Greek to at least open up a lexicon and start figuring out what the hell of it is going on here. So my focus was, okay, what is the likely origins of these misconceptions, and what changes can we make in the classroom that actually helps conceptual change happen better than just traditional lecture-based and lab-based classes? So found that a few small changes could help increase the amount of learning that was happening in the classroom. And currently what I do at MIT is a continuation of that, but with more data and some really advanced new mathematical techniques that we've been advancing.
That's exciting. One of my favorite factoids from Plato. It's hard to forget now once you hear it, but like, and he wasn't the only one that talks about it. But they didn't know what to do with magnets, and by the way, neither did ICP, obviously. But his idea was that there's a divine force causing magnets to work, which means like even these incredibly intelligent thinkers throughout history, there's some things they just don't know, and they just have to kind of fill in that gap. And he chose to fill that gap in with divinity. It's wild.
Yep. Yes. Well, and while we can, of course, poke fun at the Insane Clown Posse, I have to be a little bit reserved because they're a Michigan-based music group, and that's my home state. So I gotta be slightly respectful to my home country.
I would never say anything bad about Faygo soda. That's all I'm saying. It's a delicious family product. Enjoy it responsibly. Get the 3-liter of red soda. I assume they still sell the 3 liters. I don't know. In this economy, you need a 3-liter.
You need to buy a 3-liter just because probably one of those 3 liters is just air, so you need the 3-liter to get 2 liters. It's like potato chips.
Yeah, that is the case. Well, so we got I think 3 people in screening right now. As per usual with these shows, once we get some conversations going, they tend to keep coming. So we'll say what we always say: if you want to get in line, now's the time to get in line, rather than say 40 or 50 minutes from now. But we appreciate everyone being here, and we're just getting the show started up. And there's the interesting question from the comments. I'm just curious how we explain demons are not real. I think that it's a misformed question. It's like, how do you explain that the tooth fairy is not real? You're assuming in that question that they are real, and you need to start at the other side, right? If you think something is real, then the burden is going to be on you to say, hey, why do I think that this is real, and what evidence is there for it, right? Because if you just say, you can't disprove Santa Claus, therefore Santa Claus is true. We can kind of do that with everything. There's not much we can't do that with. So it's, but my explanation, I think, would just be biological until we find evidence that there's like an immaterial person or some sort of personhood. We're stuck with the conclusion that the biology, our brain, is what's causing all of this. There's no spirit, no soul, no ghosts.
Yes. Or the other solution that the person writing that in chat had a typo, and they were asking about the existence of Damians, and the existence of Damians is pretty likely.
So we do have, well, I mean, in Linux, obviously, we're going to have some of those, but we do have one person in the queue. It looks like they've got a question on the creation of time, and it sounds like I've got the right co-host, because there's a couple theories on time, and you'll understand what's going on when we get into it. But is the name Io? Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah. Hi. I just.
Hey, welcome
sorry,
in,
I don't
Io.
know
You're
the other
on.
guy's name.
Aaron.
Aaron, it is, yes.
Hi, Aaron.
Did they stop putting our names on screen? They don't want you to know our names, apparently.
I can't look at this. Yeah, it might be too small. I just can't read it. So yeah, my question is, and since you guys have a physicist on, I have a kind of I'm not a theist or anything, but I have a problem with one of the arguments that you've been using, namely the one that I think it comes from Ian, where God couldn't have created time because creation of time requires change. Change happens in time, and that one. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with it, and there's like 4 or 5 versions of that argument, and it certainly depends on what you think time is, right? So when you start that particular argument, you have to talk to your interlocutor and find out like what they think time is, because if they think that time is emergent, right, the argument doesn't work.
There's a few reasons why it doesn't work. I just want to point out there's a few times where it happens that in philosophy something is like an unsolvable problem, the paradox, where it is solvable in math. And I think in this case, there's nothing in math that forbids you from having instantaneous change. We have functions like Dirac delta or ideal step function that have instantaneous change. There's nothing forbidding there. And also, there's nothing that forbids us from imagining that there are other dimensions to time that we just don't have access to. And Ian, or I don't know if it was you or Ian that made that argument where God has to be looping continuously, keep creating time forever. I mean, that could happen. It's not in a time dimension accessible to us.
So
There's no
those are two
laws
separate
against
arguments. Those are two separate arguments, and obviously the laws are prescriptive, or not? They're descriptive. They're not prescriptive, right? So it's not like it has to obey a law, right? So this is why we start at the beginning, which is, what do you think time is? Because if you think time is something that is like a fabric space-time, right, and that if you think that it exists, right, with space and time together, and it had to come into existence, right? You've got a couple ways you can explain it. You could say that it was emergent, which is a possibility, or you could say that it always existed, like it's fundamental, right? If it's fundamental, you claim that God did it, right? Because that version of time that you're appealing to is what allows change to happen, right?
I see what you mean, but like the time could have existed in, let's say, if time had other dimensions. Like for us, we live in a world where time only has one dimension and space has three. Let's say there were other dimensions to time, they're just not accessible to us. Time could have just at the origin switched direction and went somewhere else. But for us, because we don't have access to those directions, we only see it as the beginning of time. Like we don't know what's going on. My argument is not that that's the case. My argument is not that it's conceivable, it's possible that it could be, which means it's not impossible, and it's just not kind of an argument against God not being able to create time. It's not the best.
I mean, it is the way that it's formulated, right? So you're trying to appeal to versions of time that we don't put into the argument, right? And if you change the argument, yeah, of course you can break it. But we're talking about a very specific version of time. That's why you have to check with the person you're talking to about what kind of time they believe in. And we're not talking about possible theories of time typically. We're talking about the theories of time that people actually hold in belief. Does that make sense? So like, if I agree, is it possible that there's some different kind of time that existed somewhere? I don't know. It certainly could be possible, but the argument's not addressing that. It's trying to address the time that we have now and how we understand it.
I would also note
my
that
only claim
even if
is
there
that
is another dimension of time, you still get the same issues, that if time can go back forever, then there's no need to create it. But if there is some point that time, even another dimension, has to come into existence, the exact same arguments follow. So adding another dimension doesn't add the problem. It just basically adds one turtle underneath the infinite stack of turtles that we're trying to avoid. So I see no advantage by making time more complicated. It doesn't get past the ontological issue that that Ian or others have had about this.
What if it changes direction, like towards zero, kind of like what's that paradox called, where the runner has to cross the road, and in order for him to cross the road, he has to get to the middle, and then half of what's left, and then half of what's left, and half of what's left.
That's Zeno's paradox.
Zeno's paradox. What if it just keeps going to the origin in a similar fashion, and there is a point of creation? It's just kind of infinitely. I mean, not really a paradox of math. It's a paradox of philosophy, but it could be going to zero. So in that point, there is an origin time, like space point, origin point.
Okay. No? Well, let's say that is the case. But even so, I believe the argument, because I think I've heard Ian make this on his own streams, but I may not be recovering it correctly. So I wish you were here to, keep me in shape. But assuming I remember it correctly, any sort of argument that there is a beginning to time has the exact same problem. So no matter what dimensions you add to it, if the issue is always a start to time produces these sorts of paradoxical results, or anything outside of time can't do anything temporarily, it's not going to matter how complicated you make time. It's fundamental to time being this way that we measure change. So whether it starts or not, I think Ian's argument would still hold. It's just that now it has extra verbiage.
Okay, I think I get what you're saying. Because in my view, time is part of space. It's not like it's kind of inseparable. I'm not sure if they mean time as a separate thing for that. Like I'm a little confused.
Not Ian. No, I think Ian and I both agree. We both believe in space-time.
Okay, so
I don't want to
saying,
speak for Ian because they're not here right now. But I'm just saying my understanding, having streamed with Ian for a long time, is we both believe in space time.
okay, so you're saying that there could not be possible a beginning to time.
What I'm saying is the act of creation is a process, and processes are sequences, right? And if time is a thing that allows sequences to happen, then you can't have a sequence to create the thing that starts the ability to create sequences.
Well, you can have instantaneous changes. Like there's nothing mathematically that forbids us to have from having instantaneous change that does not require time.
Well, I don't know what math has to do with this. I think it's pretty simple, right? If there's one state of affair where there's no universe, and then there's a second state of affairs where there is a universe, are those happening at the same moment?
They could happen instantaneously, kind of like a step function. There was zero.
No, it's impossible.
It's like an
it's not
ideal
possible.
One.
It's against the laws of logic. You can't exist and not exist at the same moment.
It's also worth noting, you've mentioned the delta function, but these are very useful mathematically because it takes what would otherwise be extremely ugly integrals and then makes them like instantly easy. But do they actually correspond to things in reality, things that happen in literally infinitesimal amounts of time? That doesn't seem to be physically allowed. And a lot, of course, also of the quantum mechanics that is in the first year textbooks is without accounting for special relativity. You then have to take a modified version of the Schrodinger equation to then bring in special relativity for that to happen. And also, when you bring in special relativity, you have to throw out simultaneity out the window, that all observers will agree on two events being simultaneous. Different observers will disagree on whether event A happened before B happened before A, or A and B are simultaneous. That three different observers can have all those three different possible observations. So that kind of time that seems to be consistent with relativity excludes simultaneity as being an objective fact.
Right, but we can't conceive a world, let's say, that, those graphs physicists draw when you cross the, what do you call it, like this event horizon of a black hole where properties of space and time change, and you can go back and forth in time, like without going through space, you're just following the same curve in space.
Like a wormhole?
There can't be a... do you know what I'm talking about, Aaron? Kind of, yeah. Like
I probably don't, but I'm sure Aaron does.
Yeah. If you were to pass the event horizon of a black hole, that the signs in front of the space terms in time terms in the space-time metric end up flipping. And so what is space and what is time get flipped. But that is when you're inside the black hole, and that has the issue that once you're inside, you don't get to come back out and tell us what you saw.
Right, but in the equations, there's really no direction. There seems to be direction in our world. Just like you said, the ideal functions don't exist once we generate those functions. They do have like a little bit of a slope. They change in time. They're not ideal. The same way, like ideally in physics, there's no direction. You should be able to travel backwards and forwards, like in these. At least like in the conceivable, like simulated world, along these equations. Right, so there could be, my argument is not that that's the case. My argument is just, it is conceivable that there could be a way for time to be created with these types of structures. So it's just not impossible. Therefore, not a good argument.
I'm not disagreeing with it. It just depends on what you think time is. Like, so, for example, Aaron, do you believe in emergent time, or what do you think about time?
To be determined. I'm doing some of my own explorations right now where emergent time does seem very profitable, but it's far from proven. More importantly, this. On general relativity with block universes, it could have a starting point that there could be some first moment, some last moment. You can have the block time like that, but you could also have it extend in both directions indefinitely. Like, you can do the math working out either way. Now, I believe the arguments of people like Ian would be that there is some sort of metaphysical reason that this can't be the case, and he might be right about that. I'm completely agnostic about the quality of those arguments. But if there is, say, a logical reason to think that time cannot have a first moment, you can make special relativity or general relativity consistent with that. And if there is a first moment, you could also try to make things consistent with that. So since the math could be consistent either way, it can't be determinative. You need some other way of choosing that. And whether it's by logical deduction, additional exploration, or you have other mathematical premises that bring in that show, oh, you have to have it the case that there is no first moment, that's very much another kind of argument. And I would let Ian try to make that one, because again, I'm agnostic about if there is a first moment in time. Intuitively, it makes the most sense that there's always a moment before the previous moment. But I've also learned, thanks to special relativity, throw your intuitions in the trash bag. That's not how the universe treats us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah. Okay.
Would I be correct in understanding, like, if time is emergent, right? It would be different than the way I might conceive of it now, right? Where time is the function or the thing that allows sequences to happen. But if it's emergent, am I wrong assuming that there were things happening before it emerged in sequences?
You're asking me, or
I'm asking Eric.
Yeah, that's a better question for Eric, though.
Yeah. So ultimately, if you're going to have emergent time, what is it emerging out of? And the way you're going to have to do that is, how do you actually assign the direction of those sequences? And the best way to do that is, I think, pointing to the only equation that we really have from fundamental physics that actually gives a directionality to time, and that's the second law of thermodynamics about the growth of entropy. And that's the best way to have slices of time that actually have a sense of direction. That the second law of thermodynamics says that entropy can never decrease in a closed system. If you then apply that to the whole universe, then entropy has to always be increasing, and that would then give a direction to the time arrow. And to what extent ultimately is this like the source of time itself versus this is something that comes along with time is debatable, to put it very mildly. But I've found some profit looking to the idea that you can actually start from a completely timeless but space reality, and then time is emergent from that. This is actually a toy model that Hawking developed back in the 80s, and shows it's at least mathematically consistent. Does it bugger with your head? Absolutely. That's basically what Stephen Hawking's free time was. What can I do that will really confuse audiences? Yeah, this will do it.
Yeah. And I think the crux of this problem is that there is a difference between mathematically possible and like logically possible, because logic, I realize logic and math are like two sides of the same coin, but like sometimes when you're just doing a logical syllogism, it's going to violate the laws of logic if you do certain things, right? Like have a universe that exists and not exist at the same time. That's just it's illogical. You can't do it. Your syllogism's false at that point. But like, I would take
if I can make that a bit solid, just because the whole idea, like, but math and logic connect together. The thing is, you will also bring in other background information to say certain mathematical solutions might be mathematically allowed, but can't be actually allowed. Like, I could do a math problem, and then one of the solutions says the number of apples I need to buy at the market is an imaginary number. Well, I realize, oh, that's a solution I have to just throw out because it's literally not possible. And those sorts of things come up in math and physics all the time, and you have to have a justification for why certain math solutions are not valid. So yeah, there is a difference between what's mathematically possible, what's metaphysically possible, what's physically possible, and what's for lunch.
Yeah, for sure. Let me ask you a question, Io. Because so Ian and I have talked about this argument a lot, because one of I would say coming out of, I used to be a Christian, then I was agnostic for a while where I kind of just believe in a generic God, and then I moved to atheism. But one of the things that moved me out of it was this concept of not having any time at all. And if time is a sequence or the thing that allows sequences of events, it seems like a God that exists or a creator that exists completely outside of space and time would just be a God that couldn't exist. It wouldn't have the powers of creation. It can't cause anything to happen. It would basically just be 100% impotent, right?
You're asking me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, just to answer your question and to address something that Aaron said, are there any rules against? Did I get cut out?
No, sorry, I piled too much on you. Go ahead.
No problem. So but kind of will address both. So is there any rules in physics that requires for our universe to be a closed system? We don't have to be a closed system. So we could be a region of some larger structure, and that would kind of answer your question as well. If that being or whatever God, whatever you want to call him, belongs to that larger structure, that he would be outside and we're just a little bubble in it. Right? No?
So is it possible there are things outside of the universe? Perhaps, but of course, once you talk about something outside of space, our language is now not exactly functioning, because if we're using inside and outside as spatial terms and then applying that to space-time metrics, we've abused the language. That's like asking what's north of the North Pole. At that point, it's like, okay, that's a sentence, but it does not have information content at that point. Also, I will note that the way that we use the word universe in physics is not so clear. So when an astronomer is talking about the universe, they might be shortening it and they're talking about the observable universe. The actual universe could be infinitely large, while the observable universe is finite in size. Right. So unfortunately, our language, even scientifically, is not always so clear, and all the more so once we start applying it in places where our metaphysics also starts to go wonky, like outside of space.
I'm not sure what you guys mean by the word metaphysics. I'm asking if it's physically conceivable. Like if it's conceivable in our universe, therefore it would not be impossible, and therefore it would not be a good argument. That was my whole point. It wasn't that this is how the universe is, or it's just that if it is conceivable that it could be this way, therefore it's not impossible. I understand that we can't talk about certain things like outside of space. I understand that our language does not allow it, and conceptually we'd have really a hard time visualizing what that would look like. But all I'm trying to demonstrate that if it's conceivable, then it's not impossible. In physics, I don't know what metaphysics means.
Well,
so I think saying that there's like a God in a different universe with different rules, I think there's this kicks the can down the road. How did that universe come to be? And if it has time, who created it, right? So I think going to an alternate universe that we don't have evidence of doesn't really fix the problem. It might fix the problem here because our universe is being acted on by an outside force, but it doesn't fix the problem over there. How'd that one get there?
No, that does not. You're right. It doesn't.
I will also add, I think, to me, what is the biggest problem with any sort of God concept, God is a mind. God has thoughts. And everything I can tell about consciousness and thoughts is it is a temporal process in itself. I am thinking. It is an ongoing process. I change how I feel about things. I feel hungry sometimes. I feel in love sometimes. I feel angry at certain times. I experience things at sometimes and others. The whole process is temporal. And if time were to stop, there would be no sense that I would be thinking in that sort of way. So to me, it says, hey, if God is a mind that thinks, that is inherently already automatically temporal. A timeless thought is no thought at all.
All right. Well, I'm not arguing that God exists or has a mind or any of that, but that's just the kind of minds we're used to seeing, right? Like, I don't know if you guys are old enough to know Star Trek. There was this being in there that was like outside of time. I can't remember what it was called. I don't know if any of you guys know. It could like appear anywhere. It was like an alien life form that lives outside of our space. or time or something like that.
That really
You guys know what I'm
depends on the
talking about?
episode, because sometimes that sounds like Q, or that sounds like the Traveler, both from the Next Generation. Q. Okay.
It was Q. Yeah.
So yeah, they had godlike powers, and so they were basically humanoids of some sorts, but with flabbergastingly amazing powers. And Runberry also wrote Q to basically be like his conception of what Yahweh is like, this you know, rather vicious and trickster kind of god that's here to basically mess around with humanity with his unlimited abilities. Um, that's apparently like a lot where the Q concept came from. But I don't think. Let's put it this way: in Star Trek, they are allowed to come up with ideas and technologies that can't actually exist. In the same way, on Next Generation, the reason the transporter works is they have the Heisenberg compensator to deal with the quantum effects of trying to scan people and then teleport them. But what is a Heisenberg compensator? It's a magical word, so that way you stop worrying about this and let the plot continue on. I would say it's the same sort of thing to give Q unlimited powers and he can go anywhere in space and time. So whatever the writers decide Q does, we can always just say, well, he's just really powerful. That's why.
Right. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I just don't think that it's impossible. There are other arguments that make the idea of God the way it's described impossible. Like this one just doesn't make it impossible.
Okay, well again, I think this actually gets to an interesting problem that David Hume actually pointed out in his own dialogues about natural religion. If you don't think God has a mind, then God is now so different from all the other conceptions. Now we're not actually talking about metaphysics or anything. We're talking fashion and preferences of which definition you want to use. If you can have God be so separate from any definition we've ever given to this object, then whether you're saying you're an atheist or not is now just a matter of preferences about definitions rather than ontologies at that point. And I would say I am an atheist because I don't think there are any disembodied minds that exist, which is, I think, a core concept of God concepts. If you're saying God exists but doesn't have any of the properties that anyone has ever assigned to a God, then it's not even sure what we'd be disagreeing about at that point.
Oh, I don't think we do. I just had a problem with this particular argument. I don't think we disagree on anything else, pretty much.
Okay. Well, I mean, we appreciate.
Thank you.
We appreciate. It's very interesting to dialogue about. Is a really cool topic. I think it's for some people it might be a little bit of a brain bender, but I think it is kind of important to discuss these natures. And again, with the argument that when we run this argument, it's not saying that God is impossible. What it's saying is the configuration of God that you have and your idea of time that you have, the person we're talking to, is not possible, right? So we're not attacking every time and every God concept. We're specifically attacking the type of like Western God and the general understanding of time that most people have. I don't think either one of us would say that this argument like completely disproves all notions of God. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for giving me the time. I don't want to take more of your time.
Oh, sure. Thanks for
calling
in.
Conversation with me.
Absolutely. Have a great one.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
We got 3 in queue, and friends, if you want to call in, the number is 720-619-2288. And as you see, Aaron's already in his wheelhouse right now. We got metaphysics and physics already going, so he's warmed up. We're going to get some more questions coming in, but make sure you get in line before the show gets too long in the tooth, because we're at the halfway mark, I think, for the show. So, but we've got one. Yeah, right. We got one theist calling all the way from Kansas. Janet. Okay, let me get Janet in here. Janet,
hi, Justin.
Welcome in. You're on
Hi, Aaron.
Good to hear from you,
Hi.
Janet. You're on SkepTalk with Justin Aaron. Hey, is this the Janet that I know, or is this a different Janet?
Yes, Justin. I
thought so. I recognize your voice
to find out where you were online tonight. Yeah. Hi. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Okay, I'm doing pretty good, but I have a question for you. I'm not going to take up too much time. This is not a science question. So I'm wondering your opinion, as I've deconstructed from the very traditional, what would you call it, fundamental church that I've been a part of, I'm part of a church
Mhm.
that is very progressive. And I'm wondering what your take is biblically on progressive churches, because I've heard some people say that it's really kind of us trying to make the Bible fit, fit better with more progressive beliefs, and that it's kind of a little bit dishonest.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure how much, in your opinion, if there's room for some ambiguity there to where we can go, no, we can accept everybody. I feel personally like I want to accept everybody regardless of gender or,
Mhm.
any of that stuff. But biblically, I know that I was taught that there is a lot of no-nos there. What's your opinion? Do I have any room to say, no, my personal stance is I do not want to be
Mm,
judgmental towards anybody?
okay, so there's room, but there are problems. So if
Hmm.
you are like really doing some deep exegesis on like Leviticus, where it talks about a man like with a man, there's some arguments that can be made. I don't find them persuasive. I personally, that's just me. But there are very smart people who do find them persuasive. Dan McClellan finds them very persuasive. My experience is that the type of people who use these arguments are people who want to stay in the faith, and the ones who left are like, yeah, it just says what it says, right? And so,
Hmm.
but
Right.
there are more problematic ones, like in Romans. In Romans, Paul is just kind of directly saying that this is, aberrant behavior. They've been given up to their
Right.
lusts and passions. Even the women exchange natural intercourse with men for women. And so, to me, like I understand if you're in the faith and you're like, times are changing. Can we go into this book and find a method for saying, yes, we should love these people too? They're welcome in God's kingdom. There's definitely a path forward for that. Now, here's the two things I would say, and even when I was a Christian, I would have said this. Number one,
Okay.
it depends on what you think about scripture, inspiration, and authority. If you think the Bible is completely
Okay.
inerrant, there's not a single mistake in it, and it came directly from God, you got a little bit of a problem, because God
Right.
just kind of directly says on a number of occasions that this isn't the thing, right? Now, the second thing, which I had this lengthy conversation with my buddy Bill when I was in seminary. This is a sin, according to the Bible, theoretically, if you think that it's true and it is a sin, right? But here's where I think people get hung up. There are a lot of sins that are in the Bible. It's weird that we kind of get hung up on this one sin, right? So, have there been pastors or priests that have been able to keep their jobs even after knowing that actually they're abusing alcohol? Yeah, happens all the time, right?
Hmm.
Do we keep some ministers in the pulpit because even after, say, they may have gotten a divorce, even though Jesus said don't get a divorce in Matthew 19? Sure,
Right.
we keep those too, right? So the church, we make lots of exceptions for some sins. It's weird that the church says this is the one sin where if you do this, you're evil. You're not welcome here. So even if you do have like a high biblical authority, I think an appropriate thing that you need to wrestle with is, why are we making the people, if you think this is a sin, why are we making these people evil and not those people over there? Because there was a time, if you got a divorce in the church, they would kick you out. I knew someone that stopped going to church in the 80s when she got a divorce, because back then in the church she went to, that was just you couldn't do it. And so, to me, I think if you're in church, you want to stay in church, and you want to, really express the love that you have for the people, you can hold on to a strong biblical tradition, but without treating these people like trash. Because every person in that church has got a vice, they've got a sin, they're dealing with something that the Bible would say is wrong. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be welcome. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't get to participate in the worship. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be, their natural gifts shouldn't be able to be used for the benefit of the body. I think it's pathetic. So that's what I would say if I was in your
Yeah.
shoes.
Okay. And that's kind of how I feel. I mean, I'm just not going to judge anybody. I just, it's irrelevant in my life. Like just don't want to deal with it. And so I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I'm not going to look at somebody. And anyways, and then when it comes to like transgender people, I am here in the Bible Belt, and people say stuff that's not even addressed in Scripture. So I don't even know, like, that shouldn't even be a question, should it? In my mind, I'm just like, why is that even? I mean, there's some things that you can kind of, like you said, you can kind of volley back and forth and go on it. But that one, I'm like, can we just not even, like, who cares? Let somebody be who they are.
Yeah.
Okay.
So from a biblical perspective, the trans topic does not get addressed. And to be fair, like I don't know how much they knew about it, that type of a thing. We do have some literature from the ancient world that like kind of speaks to this, but with very limited knowledge. But I don't think that the problem with the trans situation is I don't think people understand the science. This is actually not an issue with the Bible. This is an issue with people not understanding the science. So I don't see an incompatibility with the Bible, and anybody who would put themselves in the trans community, I don't see incompatibility there. I would say this though, and this is one of the things that I wrestled with as a Christian, and Janet, you know that I love you, but this is something that I wrestled with that I know you're going to wrestle with, which is these are people that you and I both love and care about, right? So it was hard for me to justify this behavior when I have family members and friends that are in this community, and I know that they're great people, and what they're doing and who they are is it shouldn't be a sin. It's weird. There's a God that is so worried about like who you're in a relationship with or what you're doing in your private parts that he wants to be mad at you for it, right? To me, this is incompatible with the idea of a good, loving God, and that was hard for me to wrestle with. And I know you're wrestling with it right now. I'm not saying you have to do it right now, but what I'm saying is it's a difficult thing to wrap our head around, because like you, these are people we love and care about.
Yeah, it is really difficult. And then I look at it and I get mad, because I'm like, you mean to tell me that King David and Solomon can have how many wives and concubines, and then this one loving relationship is wrong? That makes no logical sense to me.
You nailed it. And even look at God's treatment of relationships in the Bible, right? Are these relationships that we would say match the idea of a good, loving God? Because God treats women like their property. So yes, all throughout the Old Testament. It's really hard to stomach. It really is. Yeah. I had 4 sisters. Reading the Bible was difficult for me, because every time I see something, I'm like, if that was my sister, how mad would I be? You see what I'm saying? Right. And so, what I think the thing that I wrestled with, and I know you're going to wrestle with it too, I'm just encouraging you to do it honestly, right? Is what are we supposed to make of a God that sounds like a man living in the Near East in the Bronze Age? Why does God sound that way? Is it because it was made up by a guy in the Bronze Age in the Middle East? You know what I mean?
Okay, yes. And why is it so different from the New Testament then? Why is it God's one way in the Old Testament, and then everything I was taught was Jesus came down to earth and he was a physical expression of God, and he's nothing like him?
You nailed it.
Right?
So culture changes, right? So if you look at some of the really early slave laws, some of the treatment of slaves, like you can cut their nose off. Yes. Like if they get caught stealing, you can cut their hand off. Yeah. There's the treatment of slaves, but over the course of time, even societies that kept slaves would progressively change their laws to update. And so what we find, if you read the law codes from like Hammurabi all the way up to like the Gortine and then the Roman laws and things like that, like we do find that there are people who are looking back at these old laws and saying these old laws are a little bit barbaric. They need to be updated, right? And even Julian the heretic, the Emperor Julian, he wrote a book, if you could call it, like a treatise against the Galileans. He was not a fan of Christianity, and he was pointing out that, hey, these laws over here in your guys' Hebrew Bible is really barbaric, even in Roman times.
Yeah.
And this speaks to the idea that these laws needed to be updated, and the best way to do that is to put it in God's mouth. And that seems to be what happened. People needed an update to this law, and they found an update, and it had the force of God behind it.
Interesting.
Because Jesus didn't say that. Jesus, in Mark 7 and Matthew 15, Jesus advocated for following the law of Moses, even in killing the child who cursed their mother and father. It wasn't until Paul started converting Gentiles that the Gentiles were like, hey, this law code? You want me to follow this law code? And so they needed to get rid of that law code. And they weren't circumcised either. Could you imagine trying to pitch this religion to a bunch of Gentiles, a bunch of Romans and Greeks? No. And they're like, you want us to do what? Like, obviously, that's completely out, right? So in order for the religion to survive, they didn't have much of a choice. They had to modify it. And that's what we saw happen. It's a cultural change. It's not a divine change. Right.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay. I will go wrestle with all that. And thank you for answering my questions, because I trust you, and I really always appreciate when you take the time to talk to me. You know that.
Of course, Janet. Listen, I always got your back. You're doing the hard work, and we appreciate that.
Okay, thanks so much, Justin. Thanks, Aaron.
Sure. Have a good one.
Welcome.
Bye. Bye.
Janet's a treat. She's been working through deconstruction, I want to say, for the 3 years I've been online now, and I've yet to see somebody be more honest with the facts and data than Janet. She's always taking in the data and information and really considering it. It's a huge win that we have some honest people that are like, hey, I just want to know what's true, and I want to be able to live according to it, right?
Well, there is a book that says something about the truth will set you free, and I believe that much of the book.
Yes, that is the case. Well, we've got some calls coming in. We've got 3 calls right now. The number to call in is 720-619-2288. I think we've got 3 non-believers in line. We don't have a believer at the moment. Believers, as you know, get priority. But you're welcome to call in if you're not a believer. It looks like we've got some time yet. We're probably going to read closer to the end of the live stream. We're probably going to read super chats to close out. So just know maybe the last 15 or 20 minutes won't be call time. That'll probably be dialogue with our super chats and our supporters. But we've got Billy, Demetrius, and Aaron waiting to get in. And Aaron has a really good question. So here's what I'm going to do, Aaron. The 2 guests that were before you, we got 2 Aarons, this is wild. The 2 guests before you have been here for 44 and 41 minutes. So I don't want to wait much longer. But Aaron, if you could hold on till we get through the 2, you have a really, really good question, and I really want to hear you and the other Aaron discuss it. I think it'd be really cool. So nevertheless, but I want to be fair to the guests that got here first. I'm just letting you know, please hang on. I don't want to skip over it, So we're going to grab Billy from Texas, an atheist that says biblical history or historicity and the problem I run into with my Bible-believing family. So I guess we'll get more on that. Welcome in, Billy. You're on SkepTalk with Justin and Aaron. Can you maybe flesh out some of what you're trying to get into here?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess what I was looking for is honestly more resources that I could go actually look into and then present to my family members, because I'm not nearly as well read on the Bible as you are, and probably not as much on that time in history. I am a fan of history. It's something that I've studied, but it's typically basically late Roman Republic era and then after that, which is kind of beyond it. But the thing that I find myself getting hung up on is these claims that there are archaeological evidence or facts in the that support the stories of the Old Testament, and I imagine that there are some, because I think that a good part of the Old Testament is, taking God away from it, is just a relay of what happened to the people at the time. But is there a really good resource for parsing out what we actually have evidence for of the Old Testament versus what the claims are in the Old Testament?
Okay, so I think that there are so many resources available that you would be overwhelmed with the data. That's how many resources we have. So I think in order to resolve your question, we probably have to talk about a specific part of the Bible and maybe a specific narrative of the Bible, because there's a lot of archaeology. But if you want something really easy to kind of address the root of this problem, meaning that there are archaeological discoveries that confirm some of these stories, there are archaeological discoveries that confirm these stories too. Hundreds and hundreds of stories from ancient Assyria and Babylon that are real people, real stories, even real prophecies. There are prophecies in here for Ashurbanipal, for some of the Neo-Assyrian kings, and the prophecies came true, right? So just because there is literature that we can confirm, the geographic stuff is there, the wars that they're talking about actually happened, it doesn't mean that the mythology is true. Like, we know for a fact that Cyrus rolled on into what was left of Babylon. Although there's a discussion to be had about whether or not the Persians got there before the Medes, or if the Medes were somehow already there. The ancient historians thought the Medes got there first. It's a whole thing. But what we do know is that the Babylonians fell to the Medes and or the Persians, but for sure the Persians. Cyrus wrote about it in the Cyrus Cylinder. We've got a great document, right? But he also says that Marduk gave him victory, right? Surely we would know from history, yeah, we think that Cyrus existed. Got it. Did he defeat Babylon? Sure. Does Marduk exist? No, right? So I think we can be generous with the Bible and say, yeah, it's true. David seems to have existed. The wars in 2 Kings chapter 2 with the Moabites seem to have happened. The Mesha Stele confirms it. But does that mean that the God of Mesha exists? Because he says that Chemosh gave him victory over Yahweh. He took the vessels of Yahweh back to Moab. And so if you don't believe that Chemosh is real, because this is a real kingdom documented by archaeology, there's no reason to believe that Yahweh is real, just because these are real kingdoms that are documented by archaeology.
Okay, that makes sense, and I appreciate that. I guess one of the other things that kind of always confused me, at least a little bit, about the Old Testament is, like, is the Old Testament polytheistic? Like, because the way that I read it, and I could be reading it wrong, or maybe I'm reading a mistranslation, but it almost seems like it is specifically Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, going to war essentially with other gods to say there will be no more gods but me. Is that what it is? Because that's kind of how it reads. And every single time I talk with my family members, they're like, no. They were just going after heretics. There was no other gods. It's always been just one God. But that just doesn't seem like it reads that way.
No, it reads like every text of its time period, where, so for example, we have a popular phrase, the children of God, that gets interpreted in the Greek Septuagint as angels. That's where we get this idea of angels from. Angelos would be in the Greek. But in reality, this term, we know what this term means. It was heavily used in the Ugaritic literature. It just refers to the literal gods that were children of El. There were 70 sons of El, and we call her Asherah, but in the text she's Aterot. There were 70 sons, and Not was a daughter, and the 70 sons were in charge of, each one had a nation that they were in charge of. And we see this theme pop up in the Bible. It's in Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 through 9. It's in Sirach 17:17. It seems to be implied by the Table of Nations after the tower is destroyed. Just this classic idea that there were actual gods that were children of El, the Most High God, and they had roles to play. And just like the Babylonian pantheon, you could do something heroic as a god and rise up the ranks and become a favored son of God. And we even see it late in the Daniel period, or when Daniel was being written. Remember Daniel chapter 10, where the angel says that he has to fight against the prince of Greece, or the prince of Prince of Peace or Prince of Persia. Nevertheless,
I think it's
Persia. So, but when we say that, like, it says angel in our text typically, or prince, right? But at this time period, they would have understood the prince to refer to some sort of archangel. But in classical periods, these angels were just lesser gods. They softened this idea over time as cultures tried to shift towards monotheism. And it wasn't just Israel. Israel started out polytheistic. Exodus 12:12. God says, I'm going to pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike down every firstborn, so on and so forth. And he says, I will execute judgment on the gods of Egypt. That's what he's saying. The gods of Egypt, I'm executing judgment upon them. And that's what we see in Daniel, this idea that there are divine powers that have to war against each other. And this is a classic trope. And the last thing I'll say, because I don't want to be too windy, we see in the Neo-Assyrian period and even the Babylonian period and the post-Babylonian period, a lot of cultures in the Near East started shifting towards, hey, we believe in these gods, but actually this one particular god, he's actually a badass. Like, he's the real one, right? He's the one, when something goes wrong, it's because this guy's mad, right? And one of the reasons why this seems to happen is because these cultures, they were nomadic. They were small tribal cultures at one point. And then they grew large. They grew into cities. So then they had gods that were for the whole city, not for the family. But then they grew into nations. And what happens when you get nations? They go and fight over here. And then this nation grabs 1 million of these people and sends them over there. Well, now you've got a problem. You're like, listen, I thought our God was kind of a badass, but this God over here came and fucked us up. What's going on here, right? So you had this shift because you don't want to say that your God lost or that your God doesn't exist because this other God cooked you, right? So you shift towards, no, actually, our God still is the most powerful God. In fact, he's even in charge of what's happening over here. While we're in exile, he's actually here with us. He's waiting for his time. He's punishing us. This is, in fact, Marduk gets blamed on this. There is a period or after the Neo-Assyrian Empire falls and the Babylonians take over, where they literally say that this was allowed because they weren't properly worshiping Marduk, and Marduk was mad at them. And so this was kind of the general excuse for this is why bad things are happening. But in order for that to make sense, in order for this to work, you have to start prioritizing one God, because that God has to be powerful enough to defeat all the gods of all the nations if your nation is going to be superior, right? So we move from nationalistic gods to gods that were king over all the earth. And so there's a dramatic shift towards trying to emphasize one particular God. The monotheism in the Bible, to me, isn't in the Old Testament, isn't actually there. I think people are reading it into it. Even Isaiah, where God says, there's no God before me, no God after me. I'll share my glory with no other. To me, this is hyperbole. I think this is the same thing as saying, Michael Jordan is so good, there's not a player in the NBA. He's the only basketball player I even care about, right? It's this idea of in comparison to this God, there's no other God. That's the way I read it. Because every other part of the Old Testament, everything in the Old Testament would lead us to believe that there is a divine realm literally full of gods. Psalm 82 for a good example.
That makes a lot of sense. Would you then say that basically the major religions of today are essentially the result of survivor bias, that basically they are just the religions of people that happen to survive throughout time, and the other religions that fell away, they didn't?
I think that's kind of the case. Yeah. If you look at the popularity of some religions in history, like it's wild that they don't exist, and it's because they were losers in the wars. If you look at what happened to the Egyptian culture, Egypt was known as the land of the gods in ancient times. They were so well known for their religion, but you're not going to hear about it today. No one cares because they were conquered by the Greeks, and then they were conquered by the Romans, and then they were eventually conquered essentially by what they used to call the Mohammedans, the people who follow Muhammad. And so with that, the culture and the religion gets wiped out. And it's unfortunate, but that is the case. And we even lost some of it with the Israeli religion for the longest time until like 1928. We were reading this Old Testament through the lens of just what we knew about Jewish culture. We didn't know what was happening in Canaanite religion. We didn't know that Canaanite religion was the substrate in which the worship of Elohim literally emerged from, if you follow like Finkelstein endeavors and people like that, Mark S. Smith and whatnot. So, but these are things that like the pantheon in Ugarit, if it wasn't for the discovery of the Ugaritic tablets, it would have been lost to history. We wouldn't know hardly anything about worship and gods in ancient Canaan.
And I do want to caveat one thing, that the language used about the religions that survive, it kind of has a survival of the fittest, that somehow the religions that exist now are like the best ones from antiquity. And I think there's also a whole lot of chance events along these things. In particular, you look at the Roman Empire, it being the major spreader of Christianity, especially when it became the religion of the empire. And a lot of that is ultimately an accident of who won at a particular battle, and that Constantine was the one that came out on top. If he was slain in battle, or if one of his guard then decided, hey, I'm going to take this bribe and just slit his throat the night before the battle, something like that could have completely changed that history. And it's just an accident that Abrahamic faiths are dominant in the world because of what happened on one day in transalpine regions. The world is not so clean in how we got to where we are.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that. I like that a lot. Thank you. That's pretty much it as far as the religious stuff. And I'll let you go, because I know that you got that other caller with the really good question and another individual who wants to talk with you. One of the things that I'll say is I do want to call back in at some point when Dr. Aaron Adair, when you're on, to ask you what the heck is going on with the red dots and the black holes. Because I keep seeing about 1 million articles about it from the James Webb telescope, and I'm very curious about it, but I also don't want to take up any more of your time this evening.
Okay. But one last thing, Billy, because you did coming in looking for resources, and Justin is right, there's tons out there, but if I can recommend maybe one book that does a lot synthesizing the archaeology for the Old Testament, Lester Grabe's Ancient Israel, especially in its second edition, it does a lot to synthesize the various positions, the evidence, and what the Bible is and isn't consistent with on the archaeological stuff. So that's a good place to go, is a one-stop shop.
So I couldn't agree more. It's a good book.
Thank you.
There's 3 books. You should read that one first. And then there's two others that you're going to find just as interesting. One's by Ziny Zevit, and one is by Ted Lewis. One's called the Character and History of God by Theodore Lewis, and the other is The Ancient Religions of Israel by Ziny Zevit. And all 3 of those books are kind of in the same vein. They're trying to synthesize all of the data, and they're all really 3 great books.
All right, that is awesome. Thank you so much, both of you. I really appreciate all that you do. It was great getting a chance to talk with you. I hope you have a great rest of your evening and you have some great productive calls. I'll be listening.
Hey, good to hear from you, Billy.
Cheers. Good having you.
You take care, both.
Aaron, one of the things I enjoyed most about seminary was they gave us time, and we had the ability, given the papers I had to write, to get to read the ancient literature, which and go over reading the tablets and things like that. It's really cool to see how much data we have from the ancient world, but it can be overwhelming trying to dig into it and make sense of it. So like the books like you recommended and some of the others, they're actually really helpful, because you're like, if you don't know where to start, there is so much out there. You like the context of scripture now is at 6 volumes of just ancient Near Eastern literature, basically, that's somehow related to this religion. So it's crazy.
On the top of that, so much of the scholarship that you have to read is in things like German or Danish or French, and it's like, okay, you have to learn like 6 modern languages to approach 10 dead languages to figure out what the halibut is going on in this thing we call English. It's like, could somebody please do some of that hard work for me? And I'm glad there are. Oh yeah, I definitely not just appreciate, but I'm overwhelmed with the intelligence and effort that have gone into stuff that is still surprisingly critical. The fact that, modern biblical studies had to come kicking and screaming to its current consensus position. And it's somewhat amazing that it actually has not just become a bunch of priests agreeing with each other on these things. It's like, no, we think it may not go as far as I might go on some things, but it's like, oh my goodness, you compare to where it was 300 years ago, and you're like, wow, we have learned a lot, we have argued a lot, and there's still more to argue about. So come to SBL and have the arguments.
Exactly. Well, we're going to grab Demetrius, and then Aaron, number 2, we're going to grab you after Demetrius. Demetrius is calling from Washington, grew up a believer, as a theist, and is having conversations with mom about transitioning. Can you answer some questions about it for me? Well, we might be able to, but welcome into SkepTalk, Demetrius. You're on with Justin and Aaron. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. So, before we get started, you said we do have a show on Thursday nights, TACIS, that specifically would be helpful for this particular topic with people that are like experts. So I'm just letting you know, this channel does have some actual experts you can talk to. I'm just a schlub that learned electricity and like Bible. Nevertheless, whatever you need help with, I'm more than happy to at least try.
Right. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, so I kind of rambled a bit at the call screener, so I think maybe some things were confused. But first and foremost, are you guys doing okay on time? Because I also do recognize that you have another show for these sort of things. Are you okay with taking this, or do you want to go on to Aaron?
Yeah, we're actually good on time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, cool. So, yeah, so I am atheist. My mom is a believer. I grew up in a Christian household. She is more, or she's less of a believer in trans identity and things like that. I think that they're more valid, or I believe in them more. I just have a difficult time with when we get to the point of the conversation where she says we're doing too much when it comes to transgender issues. She believes that she grew up as kind of what she would describe as a tomboy, and she likes to do male activities, go out and get in the dirt or whatever is how she would describe it. And she never had an issue with, thinking that she was the opposite sex. So she has a really difficult time understanding that. I also don't really know how to explain to her exactly how somebody would feel who is transgender or going through gender affirming care. I just want to know, I guess, for one of my questions is, what does it mean to be transgender? If not somebody who just enjoys expressing themselves the opposite of their assigned sex at birth.
So I think it's a context and complex issue, right? So the context is important as well. So gender is socially constructed, right? So I think if you're on, I don't know, the right side of politics, typically they're going to say, well, sex and gender, there's no separation. But the reality is gender seems to have always been some sort of social construct. For example, your mom was a tomboy, which means there were expressions of her gender that she was more than happy to cross over to. You see what I'm saying? So what she did, she said, well, I'm going to play within these gender gray areas where they'll accept me, right? But if you step out of this socially acceptable, like these range of socially acceptable crossovers, well, now it's wrong. You know what I'm saying? So these socially constructed things, they shift over time. And unfortunately, it's hard to convince somebody that, like, hey, the culture has shifted and you're behind now. Like these, we know more now, right? And I think here's the other thing I want to say too, because like I've yet to hear a single person give me a good argument, even if a person say all they wanted to do was express their gender, say differently than what they were, their sex at birth, right? This is say it's just what they wanted to do. They didn't even say it was like their identity. It's just something they wanted to do. I fail to see the problem. Who is being harmed? How is this hurting somebody? how is this going to be damaging to society? There's no good reason to make this into a problem. I can't find the problem. So when people are talking to me about it, I dig in, and they'll say things. Well, okay, why is this a problem? Okay, well, why is that a problem? Right? And it almost always comes back to, well, I don't want my child to do this. So that's really the root of a lot of these issues. It's just parents that are uncomfortable with their child getting into, and that makes them uncomfortable. I would press them a little bit if you could. I know it's your family, so be careful. You want to love your family, but I would press them on the morality of, why are you against this? There's not a good, like, utilitarian or moral reason to be in that position.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I think she mostly agrees with that as well. When I would press her on it, it's not so much about, I don't like it or I think it's wrong for people to do it. It's more comes down to, like, people who go through gender affirming surgery. She thinks that that's a step too far because of all the risks involved. And she's confused, like, why not just not go that step, essentially.
There are regrets and, I would say, hazards of everything you do. Plastic surgery. Listen, we don't have a single problem with somebody augmenting their body with plastic surgery. But now gender affirming care is the one augment that's too far. Why? Why is that the one that you think is problematic? If people can get their nose redone, get rhinoplasty, get a new pair of huge tracts of land, if they can do all these things and these are socially acceptable, why are we drawing the line at gender affirming care? It's a nonsensical line to draw.
On top of that, my understanding of the evidence there is that the folks who want to transition and are able to, they not only have extremely low levels of regret, like if you compare it to people who regret having, like, knee surgery, the people who transition have a lower level of regret than people getting knee surgery, things like that. And more importantly, it dramatically reduces the rate of suicide amongst transgender people. I forget what the exact numbers are, but it's like a really significant reduction. So if anything, for many people, not transitioning is actually the riskier thing. And all the more so.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I mean, I can especially imagine if you are a person who presents as male, but then you are wearing more female attributed clothing, that you then go out in public and then you get all the societal stares and not so comfortable things. So it's like, oh, if you are presenting male physically, then you are feeling denigrated. I can imagine just how constantly nauseating and depressing that would be if every time you go outside, you feel like you can't be you. And if a surgery or a couple of surgeries would alleviate that, my goodness, to prevent people from doing that, I can't think of not only any good reason, but it seems like it's actively harmful when you know such a medical procedure would actually make their lives not happier, but also just straight up longer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, that's a perfect point to bring up, because one thing that she'll say as an argument, too, is she also doesn't agree with plastic surgery, cosmetic surgery, things like that, for the same reason, is the regret. But if I can show her evidence that general surgeries, such as knee surgeries, like you said, can be regrettable for a lot of people, I think that might help her out a little bit.
Yeah, it's very common. People are fickle, right? And so there's going to be a regret rate for, like, every decision a person can make, but the regret rate for gender affirming care is crazy low in the world of regret rates. It's in a different universe. The amount of people who regret major decisions in their life is really high. This is not one of them.
Oh, and I'm just now looking at the numbers. According to an NIH study, that for transgender folks, that suicidal ideation drops from about 73% to 43% with transitioning, and suicide attempts drop from 35% to about 9%. Those are gargantuan numbers, especially in a medical or sociological context. So literally these surgeries demonstrably save lives.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. That's all the questions I had. Sure.
On a side note, the activity with the highest regret rate is being a Cleveland Browns fan. So, which I understand personally. Thanks for calling in, Demetrius. These were good, contemplative questions.
Of course. Thank you guys. Also, was Matt my screener?
Say that again. I'm not sure I heard it. Did you hear it, Aaron?
Who the screener was? Well, either that was going to be Lux, or I think we also have a new screener, and I don't know who that person is very
it's
well.
Apostate.
I saw in Apostate. Oh, okay.
It sounded a lot like Matt. I just wanted to ask. Anyways, thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Cheers. Good luck. It's one of those baffling topics where I feel like 100. You know how there were practices, 200 years ago. We look at it now, and it's ridiculous that they couldn't get past it. I feel like this stuff eventually is people are going to look back and think we're stupid. Like, you know what I mean? It's just one of those. They're drinking wine out of lead. Are you kidding me?
The legal system back then was trial by ordeal. That's how we're going to figure out the truth of things. Hold this hot piece of metal and see if you're being honest.
The river ordeal is wild. But for anyone who needs to know, I did a video with Chet last year on the river ordeal. If you go to my main channel, you'll find it. It's really cool. Just type in the river ordeal. And Aaron, I didn't know that you were familiar with it, but since you know quite a bit about the ancient Near East, you should be familiar with it. It's all over the text, but it's really fun. It's akin to the Monty Python skit where they wanted to throw the witch into the water to see if she floated. Floated. That's not the past tense of float, is it?
English is weird. You can do whatever you want with it.
All right, we're going to bring in Aaron number 2. Oh, what was you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say the trial by holding hot things or the river ordeal. That's also in Old English law as well. So it's not just the ancient Near East. The English were also we think of this also a good idea, and I probably upset 3 continents of people speaking that way.
My favorite test from the ancient world is if you look at some of the ancient virginity tests, because in the Talmudic literature and other literature from time period, virginity was still important. It was all the way into the medieval period. People were trying to develop tests for virginity. One of my favorites that gets talked about in antiquity is they would set a young woman on an open wine barrel with obviously the top of it open enough, and then they would smell her breath. And the idea was that the fumes, if she was a virgin, wouldn't come up, but if she had lost her virginity, is the idiom they would use, then it would rise up through her body and come out of her mouth, and they'd be able to smell the wine. That's people didn't know stuff back then, but it's wild just to see how they okay, what can we do? It's good to be living in the modern times where we can do real stuff.
Some things have gotten a little better.
Yeah. Let's get Aaron in here from was it Wyoming? Aaron, welcome in. You're on with Justin and the other Aaron. You've got some questions about physics, so I'm gonna let you two Aarons have at it, and I'm just gonna get some popcorn and watch.
Well, it's actually pretty cool that you're here too, because you're an electrical engineer. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was in the trade for 20 years, mostly in robotics and machine automation. So I designed and built machines for who knows every industry out there: biological machines, pharmacy machines, packaging machines, painting machines.
So I'm going to try and be as concise as possible because I am a brutally tangential person. So in 8th grade, I thought I invented the idea of the unbalanced wheel. And, I eventually learned all about that. But I've been fascinated with this idea of a sort of gravity-driven way to produce energy. And I had just finished reading a paper about, and let me see if I'm pronouncing this right, time crystals, where they're structures that change over time, but at specific points in time, they maintain the same molecular structure. And when I was reading this paper, they mentioned that this process doesn't use or produce any energy. And that kind of blew my mind, and I was hoping they would elaborate on that part. And I even went to the whole scientific paper, and they did not, to my great frustration. And so that kind of got me thinking about other things like magnetism, and specifically magnetism and gravity. Is there any energy that is, I don't even know how to quite state it properly, because you can create gravity batteries, but you have to take the energy to put material high and let the gravity pull it low. Is there any actual energy that is being produced, consumed, whatever, when two objects of mass attract to each other?
Ultimately, what you have in those sorts of situations is energy transitioning between potential and actual, or what we'll call kinetic energy. So you hold a rock up, you have given it gravitational potential energy, and we describe it that way because we can say, if I let it go, a force acts on the object. If the force acts over the distance that it's falling, and when you have force times distance, that's doing work, that's adding energy to that system. And so we're talking in this way. We say that there's that the energy is going from potential to kinetic. And conversely, if I have something and I throw it up, it has kinetic energy. And because there's a force acting on it, it slows down and loses kinetic energy, but then is gaining potential energy. But the total energy in that whole setup remains constant. So no energy is created or destroyed in that setup. It just goes back and forth between sources. Things get a little bit more complicated when you then ask, well, what happens when the object hits the ground? Then the energy becomes sound and becomes thermal energy, and it becomes nothing that we can do anything practical with at that point, unless the practical idea you have is make a bunch of sound of rocks dropping, which might have some value, but is limited, to put it mildly. Now, we can take this up a notch. And in curved spacetimes, we actually lose the ability to actually describe and calculate energy, and it no longer becomes a conserved quantity. This was one of the important fixes to general relativity produced by the female scientist you have never heard of, but was at least as much of a genius when it came to mathematics as Einstein himself. And this is Emmy Netter. She was another German mathematician, and at a time when women were not allowed to earn PhDs in mathematics, but she was just too wicked smart to keep her down. And she was looking at the work of Einstein and David Hilbert, who were trying to figure out these weird things with the equations, because it seemed like, hey, we're having these issues about what's being conserved and not. And she realized you actually get conserved quantities based on symmetries in space and in time and in rotation, that the fundamental symmetries of energy conservation, momentum conservation, angular momentum conservation come from symmetries in time, symmetries in space. That basically, if you say the laws of physics is the same as now as it is in 10 minutes, that means that there is this time symmetry, and one of the things that pops out from that, naturally, weirdly enough, is energy conservation. But, as you might have heard, gravitational objects bend space-time, and now time actually does change and things like that. So yeah, you actually end up losing the ability to carefully calculate energy when you fully account for all the weird stuff that general relativity does. From day-to-day processes, you don't have to worry about this, but no energy. So energy is either not lost or gained, it's never created from anything, or you lose the ability to actually account for it in the first place because it depends on a flat space-time. And once you break that, then you have nothing left that you can actually carefully quantify anymore. So it goes from, yeah, it's a conserved quantity to actually, but it's not fundamental because, again, the universe has to come along and say, you thought that was easy? Slap.
Well, so I guess I misspoke. I shouldn't have said created energy. When I did, I was more thinking of it produces energy that could be harnessed, which you pretty much answered that question. But that's more what I meant by that. So then let's go with a different example. If we have two astral bodies floating in space, and they have enough gravity that they are affecting themselves on each other, are you saying that energy was already put into the system when those, say if they were pulled apart during the expansion of the universe, are you saying that that energy is there and is put into the system, and when they come back together, forming gravity or using gravity, that is where that energy is originates, and it just seems like to us it's brand new energy because we weren't there to account for them being pulled apart to begin with?
Well, weirdly enough, actually, you'll have an energy loss with this sort of setup. And I know that sounds a bit weird, but instead of talking about galaxies, it might actually be a bit easier to talk about light. Because one of the weird effects we have due to the expansion of the universe is that things from the distant past are redshifted. And it's not because the object is unattracted to us and is running away. It's that the space itself between like us and the other parts of the universe is expanding. And this shifts the light to the red end of the spectrum. So this is where we get like redshift. And we see that there's more and more redshift the further and further you look back into space and back into time. But also, the wavelength of light tells you how much energy there is. So when something is being redshifted, it's also losing energy in that light. Where is it being lost to? It's because of the expansion of space itself. So again, this is what happens that when we are trying to then, when we realize, oh, our energy accounting gets mixed up because of the curvy and expanding nature of space-time, that it seems like energy is coming out of nowhere or is disappearing out of nowhere, but it's that our accounting mechanism actually fails because the metric that you're using to do the measurements is not a constant thing.
I think, Aaron, number two, I had a similar question to you, and I want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, and I don't have an answer for it. I think Aaron does. If you have two static bodies in space, so not the universe, right? The universe doesn't exist, right? You just have two static bodies, they have some mass, and they're close enough to each other that space-time would cause them to move, right? That movement feels like gravity is causing energy, right? If energy is the change in position and velocity of two bodies, right? Is that is it okay to describe it like that? Is that a silly thing to do? Because it feels like gravity itself would be like a source of energy, right?
I mean, there's definitely energy involved, and so if we have a otherwise perfectly flat space-time, and then you just put two objects there that, yeah, they have the effects of what looks like gravitational attraction, and yeah, by any reasonable sense, you would say there is potential energy in the system, and as the objects are like attracted to each other, well, now they start moving, so there's kinetic energy, clearly, right? But it's ultimately going to be a matter of accounting of what energy is in there, because our other friend when it comes to relativity is that whether things are moving or not depends on your point of view. So we're talking about these two objects being static, but then you have to say, well, static with respect to what? If there's a rocket ship going by that one of these galaxies at 99% the speed of light, Well, those galaxies aren't stationary to that rocket ship, for example. So we get to have all sorts of fun and complications. But in the simplest sense, yeah, you got two massive bodies. They have gravitational potential energy. They attract each other, and they would start moving towards each other and speeding up towards each other relative to each other. And either they would collide head on, or they would start then zipping around each other. Now, on the other hand, if they are now spinning around each other, you get some other effects from general relativity that you can start producing gravitational waves that can take away some of the rotational energy of the two systems, and very, very, very slowly the energy can dissipate and the two objects will then get like spiral closer and closer and closer together. And we've actually now seen this effect with black holes, that we've actually watched black holes merge together as they get close enough that they're producing strong enough gravitational waves that we can detect them here on Earth and then see them finally merge together. And the instrument that has been able to do this is the Laser Interferometer Gravitory Observatory, or LIGO. And the sound, I shouldn't say the sound, the wave that gravity makes is actually, if you translate it to sound, we could hear it with our own ears. So what does the sound of two giant black holes merging together sound like? Biggest explosions in the universe sounds like
like a cartoon.
It's almost cartoonish, except the amount of energy released is more than like a galaxy's worth of stars all at once.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean,
So
I think that kind of answered it for me. Sorry to get in there, Aaron, with a question of my own, but I thought you and I were kind of asking the same question, so I just want to make sure we're getting it.
Yeah, that's totally relevant. So if you do have time, do you know anything about time crystals and how they can change their states without consuming energy? I'm sorry, they're pronounced time crystals.
Yes, you have to pronounce them in italics. I have done absolutely nothing to research these. This is especially in condensed matter stuff, which is way outside the things I know about. The only way I could probably understand of what's going on is if the energy total in the crystal remains constant, but maybe the energy configurations in different parts of the crystals are increasing and decreasing. And so they're passing it back and forth, almost like the ticking back and forth inside of a clock. But I am being extremely speculative. I do not know the details of time crystals at all. So I am reluctant to say anything more.
All right. Yeah, it is really difficult to research something that specific with just the internet. So,
yeah. I would also have to check, because when they talk about energy, are they talking about energy total? Are they talking about Gibbs free energy, which is kind of a subset of energies? And when you're doing chemistry, you learn more about this. But again, I'm really speculating about any of that being involved. So I'm going to just step back and say time crystals, quote marks, no idea.
Yeah, because even reading the actual paper, where I could process maybe 96% of the words, they just did not elaborate on that at all. It was just a statement that this does not consume, or this does not use energy. And it was incredibly frustrating that they just assumed whoever was reading this would just be like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, that makes sense.
Very, very quickly, just looking through with Google AI overview, but yeah, nothing I'm going to be able to do is going to give you any insight without me going and earning another PhD in physics to be focused on condensed matter. And when I was at Ohio State, they had a really good large-sized number of condensed matter groups, and they had, at that time, the most powerful laser in the world. And they just, shot it across the building up in the upper stairwells. And I got to see the other grad students have fun with it. I did. I stayed away because they had a giant laser.
Well, I still have 1,000 questions, but I think that covers it for at least this phone call. I would thank you very much, both of you. I would recommend, if you've got 70 minutes and really good alcohol, you can watch the new video by my favorite physicist, Terrence Howard. It was very informative and interesting. And with that, I'll just say good night and thanks again.
Well, thank you so much, Aaron. Cheers.
Aaron,
All right.
if you're watching
You guys
Terrence
have a good
Howard,
one.
I'm going to have to say, Aaron,
Yeah.
if you're watching
just
Terrence
gave-
Howard for physics and math, you screwed up, AA Ron. You screwed up.
You just gave Aaron number one an aneurysm.
To be fair, I was watching Dave Farina watching Terrence Howard, but it was still very interesting.
Yeah, that requires filtration and strong beverage. Agreed.
Yeah, indeed. Well, it's great to hear from you, Aaron. Those are really good questions. I was so happy that you were able to stick in line as long as you did, so we can ask them. Because I had one of the same questions myself. I was excited.
Yeah, I'm glad you could piggyback on top of that, because that was interesting to me too. And I would have been watching or listening regardless. So I had all night.
Well, thanks for calling in, and I'm sure we'll hear from you soon.
Yep. You have a good one.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Side note, there was actually a secret plot. I didn't tell anyone. I actually joined the line just so I could ask Aaron and Forrest science questions. That was my plan all along, because now they're captives when I'm on screen with them. So I got one more question. Planck star, it's a hypothetical, right? What do you think the likelihood is that they exist?
Planck stars?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anything about them, so I can't say anything. I've heard of the possibility of dark matter stars, black hole powered stars, but Planck stars, I don't know that term, so I'm going to say absolutely nothing because I don't know anything.
My understanding is it is a star that forms inside of a like a supermassive black hole that they think might be responsible for the phenomenon that I think colloquially is being called black hole bounce, which sounds kind of it's a whole thing. But I'm just learning about it, and there's all these new concepts that I think are just new, like even to people in the science community. And I've got lots of curiosities, but anyways, those curiosities have to wait because it's time to read super chats.
Yes. I will note though that apparently there is a TikTok or YouTube short about Planck stars by Dr. Blitz, so he can say more about that than me.
I'll be asking about it this week. I'll grab the first one. We got 10 from Joshua Everett. Thank you so much, my friend. Says, I was messing around with a photo editor and transformed an image into negative axes. That made me think about tracking backwards to the Big Bang. Thoughts on space-time inversion at the origin? Great question. I think you were touching that earlier, didn't you?
Yeah, and a lot of our theories of physics, if you flip the minus sign, sometimes it just doesn't matter and it's symmetric on which way time goes. So could it be the case that everything's consistent with everything running backwards? It's an open question.
That's pretty wild.
Mm-hmm.
And
we got $49.99 from, and very generous $49.99 from Billy Sipes. Just going to throw this out there. Yitzhak is an imperialist, a genocide apologist, and a Zionist. On the theological debate, he can be decent. On a pragmatic and political level, his views are monstrous. I don't know what his views are because I have not tracked all of that. But when it comes to imperialism, genocide, and that form of Zionism, yeah, I'm against it.
Yeah, obviously I'm in the same camp. I don't know much about Yitz. Yeah, I've talked to him. I think that's my second time on this channel, so I don't have the background that some of the audience has. I don't know. You know what I mean? $5 from Angry and Malachi Infant. Good to see you. Justin, look up relativistic addition of velocities. The formula works out for electrons and photons. Oh, no way. Mm-hmm. I'm looking it up right now. I'll backtrack and remember how to do math. Believe it or not, in my career, most of the math I learned in school was irrelevant for what I was doing, but I'll definitely look it up, and it should be really interesting. I appreciate that.
Yes. And I will note right now, the mistake you will make when you are using those equations, because I make it every time without being extra careful, minus signs. When you are adding those velocities together, you got to keep into account directionality, and so plus and minus signs. Otherwise, you're going to add velocities together and things won't make sense. But the cool thing is, take the speed of light, add other velocities to it with the relativistic addition of velocities. It always, always, always comes out the speed of light.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, $5 Australian from Darren McAuliffe. I recommend Einstein's book Relativity. He teaches both theories and a bit at a time. I only read it, but I only read it, but I'm sure if I studied it, I'd understand the math. I think I have an old copy I shouldn't say an old copy, a copy of that. Even if the copy is new, it's obviously from the 50s at most. I would only note this. Einstein was a smart dude, but we've discovered even more things about his own theory than he could have known. A lot of stuff about black holes was only determined after he died. So Einstein obviously knows a whole lot. His dead corpse is still a better physicist than I am. But strangely enough, we still know more things that Einstein does.
Yeah. I think this one's yours, right, Aaron?
I just read the last one.
I'm losing track here. I'm so used to reading every super chat on my stream that when we alternate, I lose track because I'm thinking about the questions. $5 from Jacob says, I'm just curious, how do you guys explain demons are not real? I think actually I addressed this earlier in the show because I didn't realize we were reading all of the super chats. But I don't think they need explaining, right? When we're positing like metaphysical, immaterial entities, I think the burden of proof is obviously on the person who believes in them. It's like, how do you explain the existence of Santa? Like, well, I don't need to. He doesn't exist. Like, you're the one saying he exists. You have to explain it, right? So I think that's important. But the other thing, too, is say, listen, like, we have a concept of what exists and what doesn't exist. And there's just no evidence of the demons, right? So until there's evidence, there's no reason to believe in it. You don't have to say that they don't exist. You can merely just say, listen, if you present me good evidence, maybe I'll believe it. But without the evidence, it's not going to happen. And this one,
conversely, I'll read this one. I was just going to say for the previous one, when it does come to demons, there's at least a psychological thing to explain, because people claim to have experience with demons, but that can be explained within naturalism as cultural byproducts and brains doing weird brain things, because you can see how culturally contingent it is. Sometimes it's the pitchfork demon, sometimes it's the weird lady with long black hair in Japanese culture, or sometimes it's gray aliens. It's very contingent on where you grew up and what was normal in your culture. Now, this super chat of $5 generous from Gentleman Viking with a good puppy for the icon. The only thing I need to know about juggalos is that from time to time, fasci types try to cozy up to them, and the juggalos do not let that happen. I think I've heard this, that juggalos have resisted becoming alt-right, but I do not know enough for sure. What I can say is, when I was in Boy Scouts, my fellow members of our troop had the various albums, and when we were going on long camping trips, and my father was the one driving the van at the time, he was very tolerant in what music choices that people put in. And yeah, we listened to a lot of Insane Clown Posse going to and from summer camp. So again, I can't completely dismiss it because it's unfortunately part of my heritage.
It was part of the culture. A lot of us in this age bracket listened. It was a thing. Now we have to explain this to our children. It is what it is. And $10 from Where is Waldo? This is an uneducated question, but that's why I'm asking. Fair enough. Gravity slows down time, right? So would time for the hot, dense state before the Big Bang just have passed inconceivably slowly?
So, not a dumb question, but the issue is that when we are talking about time going slower, it's always relative to some other observer in some sort of other reference frame. But if you're talking about the whole universe, there isn't any other reference frame to go by. So that issue of time dilation doesn't really come into play in the same way.
And $10 from Barth. Did I do it again?
Yep.
Man, someone needs to control me. I need a handler.
Okay. All right. I will do my best to handle things. But $10 from Balthazar, one of my top favorite magi. What historicity do we have for figures that were so charismatic they appear in both myth and record in wildly different representations? I don't know about how charismatic they are, but I've been recently looking at the example of a figure from Chinese history and one of the most famous novels from China. If you know the story Journey to the West, the main monk in there, Tang Sung, he is actually based on a real monk who did travel from China to India to get sacred scriptures. And we know his story because he wrote his own travel log, and we have like his students writing biographies of him. And there's like 900 years between his writing and the novelization, where he's now going to India with the help of this immortal monkey that can change size and shapes and destroy mountains. And he's also assisted by his friend Pigsy, and has to constantly be assisted by all sorts of other Buddhist gods and goddesses as all these other monsters come out trying to eat him, because if they eat him, they'll become immortal. Obviously, the story is fantastical, but the person of Tanzan is based on a real dude. Was he charismatic? He thought highly of his knowledge of Buddhism, but charismatic, I don't know how to judge that. So that's an example.
We got £5 from Babs. Hey, Babs, good to see you. It says, you are born transgender. It may take a few years to figure it out and defy the social stigma, but eventually you must do, you do what you must to be yourself. And Babs, I mean, I agree. I can't, it's hard for me to imagine living inside of a state where you feel like you can't be yourself. And it's important to be true to yourself, for sure. That's why there's so many atheists that are in the closet too. That like they can't tell people that they're atheists because they're so afraid of getting judged. Like, you got to live it. You got to be yourself. If you want to tell people, tell them.
All right, and an additional £5 from Babs Barrett. They came for the transgender people, and I spoke out because I read the bloody poem. Damn right.
That's good. And 5 from Joshua Everett says, question for Justin. Hey, Justin, what's a Babel? Slightly serious. Which non-God Bible character would be the best Marvel character? So this is a tough one. Because there's a lot, by the way. Here's who I like, though. One of my favorites that doesn't get any attention is Anath. She's like the one female goddess that gets some attention in the Canaanite literature. And she doesn't get credit for what she actually did. So Baal rose to the top of the ranks on Mount Zaphon after he defeated death. But you know what really happened? He went down and got his ass kicked by death, Moth, the god of death. Anat had to go and save him. His sister came and actually saved him before he was restored back to life through a really interesting sprinkling process, but then rose to fame in the pantheon and was given credit for going down and defeating death. So Anat really is kind of like the unsung hero of the Baal cycle. And I would love to see her get the recognition that she deserves, because it's such a cool figure.
I'm also realizing in Revelation, Thanatos, the god, or death, is thrown into the lake of fire, and Thanatos, in short, is Thanos. So already in the Marvel universe.
True.
All right, we have $5 from TMAZ9044. As atheists, do you ever wish there was some kind of happy afterlife? I find the idea hard to let go of after losing faith. No evidence for it. If there happens to be life after this one, I'm not against it. But as you say, no evidence for it. And all the evidence I see is this is the only life I got, and I need to do everything I can with it, because I can't guarantee there's going to be any handouts when I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the inner desire to want to continue existing, but I personally don't spend a whole lot of time trying to find ways to believe it. It seems to not be the case. $5 from Professional says, there is a YouTube video by Anton Petrov that talks about time crystals. I actually don't know what a time crystal is. I'm lost on this one.
Very quickly, when I was looking at, is that so the point of a crystal, like an ice crystal, is that it has a repeating structure that you can see, but that repeating structure is in space. I guess, with a time crystal is that you see a repeating structure over time. So some pattern that just repeats that you're seeing inside the crystal. But beyond that, like, what's it made out of? How do you maintain it? Is it a particular exotic form of matter? All those sorts of things way outside. And yes, the channel run by Anton Petrov is fantastic. He puts out like science videos pretty much every day, mostly focused in physics and astronomy. And well, every video starts by him telling you you're a wonderful person. So it's like you get Mr. Rogers and science. What could be wrong?
I think is this yours?
I think so, yes. $20 from Fight the Dumbing Down of Us. Thanks, guys, but I need yits out of here. Race flag.
Understandable. And 49 from Kelly, good to see you, Kelly, says, the only thing that makes me sad is I really wanted more cowbell. You know what? I actually used to keep a cowbell in here. I actually just threw it out maybe a month ago. I'm sorry I can't give you a cowbell. I don't know what else. Maybe I can give you one of these. Is that an okay substitute?
Justin? I think I have a fever.
Yes. Yeah,
and the only medicine,
man of fever.
And the only medicine is more cowbell.
It is unfortunate that I did not add that to my soundboard. I'm going to have to make that a reality.
On the other hand, if we need more Blue Oyster Cult, again, you might have noticed I have some Godzilla paraphernalia around me. Well, the most famous Godzilla song is from Blue Oyster Cult. Godzilla 1975 Spectre. I forget which song it was on that album, but yeah, good nostalgia memories for me with that song as well.
Well, Aaron, I had a great time tonight. Thank you for entertaining some of my questions. Really do appreciate that. And friends, thank you for being here. Thanks for all the likes, shares, and supports. Remember, tune in tomorrow and Thursday, and also the Sunday shows. We have shows all week.
Don't forget about Wednesday. I hear Justin Dude is going to be on somewhere.
It's possible tomorrow on the Hang Up, I'll be here again. Wait, Wednesday. Today's Monday.
Yeah, tomorrow's Tuesday. Wednesday. Get your calendar up, okay?
Yeah.
The Crew and Mod.